Alright, I figure I'll get going kind of early because there's some things I want to take care of. First off, my capture card is acting up again, so wonderful, thank you. Great. Give me 1 second to fix that. Should be working now. Capture card? No, it is not. Oh, I know what I have to do. Okay, hold on. I have to deactivate it first. And then switch the scene, I think. Or just do this. 1 second. Oh. Okay. Activate? No, nothing. What the fuck? Why does this keep happening? Oh my god, dude. Bro, are you kidding me? Deactivate. Okay. Activate. Here, let me just get rid of this. Yes, remove that. Remove this. Alright, add capture card. I keep having to fucking do this over and over again. Okay, there we go. Cool. Nice. Unfortunately, it is now on the top layer, which I do not want. I want it actually to be here. Yeah? Alright, and then this will be... I'm going to have the capture card audio a little bit quieter than usual, because I need to get another thing up and going. I need to get the React window up before I properly start things. Let's make the desktop audio. All right, let's see here. React Andy properties. Let us now copy this link. All right. Oh, I don't need to copy the link, actually. I can just do this. Yes. Now if I show that... Yeah, there we go. All right. I promise you guys, you are not ready for this. Because additionally, I am not ready for this either. I might make that a tiny bit smaller so that it obscures less of the screen. It's about the same size as my webcam. If you can see the webcam fine, you should be able to see the video react thing just fine as well. And now, keep in mind, I will not be able to look at the Twitch page itself. I will be able to only look at the OBS chat window here. And with that, let's actually get started. So, what do I know about this video that I'm about to watch? Well, this is a debate between Infrared, Haas, and Tim Pool, and somebody else on Tim Pool's show. Infrared is a self-described MAGA communist, which is very esoteric thing, hard to explain, hard to hard to explain. And Tim Pool is just your average right-wing grifter who sometimes plays at not being a right-winger. I think he did that until pretty recently. But anyways, they debated on his show.
You say that it's the communists who have infiltrated the system.
Let's see what
all evidence and experience on my part shows me the opposite is true. It's the system that has infiltrated the communists. Can you name a single Communist Party member who is in office right now?
Let's yeah, let me pause the video real quick. I'll make sure to have my cursor here, and I will keep my finger over the K button, so I can pause and unpause as needed. I guess I should take the time to explain Haas's beliefs so you kind of know the perspective with which I'm coming to the debate with that you might feel differently. Haas is a MAGA communist, which is a much sillier version of fascism, I think. It's like, God, the way that Haas does it, it's very hard to describe. It's a very nebulous set of beliefs. He identifies, at the very least, with leftist aesthetics, but he's very firmly in the camp of tankies. And furthermore, he has a very, very esoteric streak. And that's probably the best way I can describe him. I would almost, before most other things, I would actually describe him probably as an esotericist, right? Like his beliefs are like mostly he likes esoteric stuff. I guess like I think he wrote like a dissertation or a fucking gigantic essay, like a manifesto about Nosbolism or something like that. Very strange guy with very strange beliefs. But you know, because I never know what he's cooking, sometimes he is in fact cooking. Yeah. Although if I'm being more realistic and less charitable, he is functionally at many times he is just a fascist. So let's actually let's get into it. Although I do have to give him credit because he uploaded the full debate to his YouTube channel. The Tim Pool affiliated YouTube channels, you know, Tim Pool, Timcast, whatever, only uploaded very short clips of it. And presumably it exists somewhere as an unlisted video on the Timcast channel, but that's really hard for me to find. And judging on the small bit of what I've heard about the debate, it's not surprising that Tim Pool would elect to unlist the video and keep it from prying eyes, because I've heard that he actually didn't do that well in this debate, and Haas kind of, gave him, 4, rhetorically speaking, so.
That is not the point.
No, that is the point.
Welcome to the first culture
There we
war
go.
on Tenet
I was going to say I'm going to skip the intro, but just cut right to it.
Media on YouTube. Thanks so much, everybody, for hanging out. We're going to have a fun one today. We're hanging out with Haas Aldin and Trevor Loudon. I'm pronouncing that correctly?
Yep,
Trevor Loudon.
that's correct.
And we're going to be talking about, I guess, MAGA communism.
I don't know who Trevor Loudon is, but I think he's like a pro Tim Pool, or not pro Tim Pool. Like he's a more conventional conservative. And Tim Pool here, usually what he likes to do in this scenario is sort of play moderator, act like he's the dispassionate, like reasoned guy in the middle, but that's not really the case. All this to say that this is a hostile environment if you disagree with Tim Pool.
And classical liberalism, so this should be very fun. Haas, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, so I guess Loudon is a classical liberal, as he calls himself. I'll just do random probably the whole time, make this as easy as I
consider
can.
myself a comedian, a geopolitical analyst, and a political philosopher. And I technically coined the term MAGA communism, although it started as a kind of meme within my community. I run a show called The Infrared Show, which you can find on YouTube. And, I'm here to present and I think give a proper introduction to what MAGA communism is all about.
All right. Well, this should be really interesting. MAGA communism. And I think you also the thread that we'll get into about how Marxism is not woke.
Right, yes. I also plan on releasing a book soon, which is going to be kind of a complete overview of my philosophical foundation for my views,
Right
including that thread.
Oh, okay, so it's
And
gonna be
you work with Jackson Hinkle?
Yes. I work very closely with Jackson off.
Okay, yeah. So to give you an idea, this is going to be really difficult, but I'm committed to the bit. I'm in too far to stop now. There are a couple things I give away Haas's like more underlying political beliefs. First, that when he says that Marxism isn't woke, the term woke has lost so much meaning. But if you just want it to mean like in favor of the rights of oppressed social minorities and stuff like that, then Marxism is definitely woke. There are all sorts of subsets of Marxism, like queer Marxism, feminist Marxism, and things like that. But him working with Jackson Hinkle is the second thing that I think is kind of revelatory. Revelatory, excuse me. Can't words today. Jackson Hinkle is another, at times, self-proclaimed MAGA communist, but really he's just a pro-Russia and pro-Syria kind of stooge. Big presence on Twitter, and he has lately gone on a pretty anti-Semitic streak against Jews in the wake of the October 7th attacks, because it seemed like anti-Semitism was blowing up, and it became a little bit more acceptable, commonplace to do so. But all that to say, I don't think these guys are genuine leftists, and I think we'll probably get to see some of that in the debate here.
Coordinating and also discussing these ideas and so on. So yeah, I would consider Jackson's views as the same as mine.
Right on.
Okay, there you go.
Cool. Should be fun. Trevor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, look, my name's Trevor Loudon. I'm a New Zealander, but I live in the United States. My specialty is really exposing and exploring communism. I've written several books.
So he's a hack author,
basically.
basically.
I focus a lot on the Marxist influence inside the Democratic Party.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna wait, but just know that all of the things that he's talking about here are not real. None of what he's talking about, the Marxists infiltrating the Democrats, none of that is real. I only wish it were
real. I have
real.
a blog, trevorloudon.com, and a website, keywiki.org, which has got 160,000 files of leftists, communists, socialists, radicals,
this is just
from
words.
all sorts of areas. And so I consider myself. I would have started out as a pretty much a classic liberal, but I have a very strong social conservative bent. And
Let me
a very
actually
strong
speed this up a
national
little
focus.
bit.
Well, right on.
1.25
Let's
speed.
just we'll get started then.
This is, by the
What
way,
is MAGA communism?
2.5
So
hours.
MAGA
so I'm gonna
communism
speed it
began
up
as a
bit.
meme, and the origins are actually interesting. So around a few months earlier last year, so around August 2022, there was this big meme
boy.
going around. I don't know if
War?
you heard about it, the Dark Brandon meme.
Yeah.
Remember that? And it's this kind of... We took it as a kind of like, this is an example of some neo-fascism, because we regarded the support for the neo-Nazis in Ukraine by the Democrats, the increasing...
Okay, when he says we, he means his community,
crackdown on
because
classical
people do not
liberties
believe
as an
that.
example of
Not writ large,
the
anyway.
only conduit, but a significant avenue for the growth of fascism in the United States. So the Dark Brandon meme, we saw it as an acknowledgement of that. So we created this counter meme. It wasn't like that intentional, but it was spontaneous, called, well, if you're going to have your Dark Brandon, we're going to have our MAGA communism as like a counter, right?
Is it seriously meant
that's
to
interesting.
convey communist ideals?
Yes,
So-
I think one of the reasons I don't focus too much...
So MAGA communism started as a refutation of leftists supporting Ukraine, or like leftists and mostly liberals. I think that's what he's getting at with the Dark Brandon meme. Supporting Ukraine against Russia, which, by the way, if you are a leftist or have genuinely held political beliefs about like people being aggressed upon should have the right to defend themselves, then you should support Ukraine against Russia.
On the, and it's confused
opportunity,
a
I
lot of
guess.
people. The meme aspect of it is because, for me, I don't actually see a clear distinction between meme and something serious. I think that actually comedy and ironies and things like
That's
this
valid, I think.
convey and express truths more profoundly and correctly than something kind of stoically formulated in a dry kind of purely formally consistent way.
So let's just start here then. I guess when I hear MAGA communism, it sounds like you're saying you're
That's
voting
actually-
for Donald Trump and you want a communist system of governance, or...
What Haas said there about memes, I think, is valid, and I want to talk just very briefly about that. Yeah, theory in the typical sense, like, you can say, oh, read theory or whatever, but it's so dry, it's not all that interesting, and a lot of times memes are ways of people using humor and humorous phrasing, framing, and devices to express genuinely held beliefs, sentiments, etc. So I do think that it's valid to bring that up, and I should specify. I don't think Haas is a dumb guy. I think he's decently smart. Again, it's very hard for me to be inside anybody's head. But he's got something going on up there, and I think that when he says this about memes, he's right.
Or social order.
No. MAGA communism has little to do with the person of Donald Trump, besides him as a kind of mascot. We see Trump as a meme, basically. Okay. But the truth of MAGA communism is that we believe that 2016, for the first time in decades in the history of the United States, introduced real political distinction and the Schmittian sense of enmity. Because for decades, the Democrats
here comes
and
the esotericism.
That was not really a political distinction.
Agreed.
It was a distinction on the basis of a mutual recognition of the fulfillment of the same interest. And miraculously, somehow, this kind of clown, Donald Trump, I mean, let's remember this guy's from The Apprentice. I mean, it was very funny he got elected, let's be honest. He kind of drove these two camps insane. You see the same George W. Bush Republicans and the good old Democrats, they suddenly are united in the face of this threat. And typically the leftist...
Small critique there. The George W. Bush type of Republicans actually are not against Donald Trump. The entire reason that I've talked about this before, how the Republican Party basically just became the party of Trump once he came along because there was such a void of charismatic leadership. What he's referring to mostly is the appearance of being anti-Trump. The Bush Republicans, when push came to shove, all of them fell in line. Every single one, Romney included. He only began to dissent more later as it became clear that the party was hurtling into full-blown fascism. But the Republican and Democratic parties did not necessarily share the exact same goal. The goal, I think, was very similar. Both capitalist parties and whatever, but the Democratic Party was clearly, genuinely opposed to Trump and what he wanted to do, while the Republicans' opposition to Trump was purely an optical one. They didn't like that he was ill-mannered. They had no problems with the things that he supported. They had a problem with him being loud and impolite. And that's my critique of that point from Haas. But once I get to it straight away here, let me
characterization of the MAGA movement has been, this is the ground of a neo-fascism.
Which
to me, I don't see MAGA as inherently fascist. I don't see it as inherently communist. I don't see it as inherent. It's just American politics,
fascist,
but articulated in a grassroots and
it is nationalist,
non-institutionalized form. So, of course, anti-communist ideas prevail among MAGA. Of course, many other GOP and Democrat conceptions prevail among MAGA. But the key thing is that the foundation of these ideas is no longer based in the hegemonic institutions. It's authentically based in what these people actually believe, and therefore, it is a fertile ground for the propagation of ideas, which for a long time could not be propagated because of an institutional barrier.
So then
what he's describing here, I think, is just populism.
Well, I'll put it this way. Marxism-Leninism, and this is what the origin of communism with a capital C in modern times is, right? We can go into the history, but basically everyone was a social democrat or called himself a socialist before the October Revolution of 1917, which reintroduced the term communism and repopularized it. And it was Stalin who canonized this into an ideology called Marxism-Leninism. And if you read Stalin's Foundations of Leninism, he says the key contribution that Lenin introduces for Marxism is the national question. So you see with socialism in one country, which is kind of Stalin's interpretation of the construction of socialism, Marxism-Leninism is already, in the American context, MAGA. It's already America first when applied to the American context. The reason there's been a...
okay. I understand what he's describing now. It took me a little while because, again, it's esoteric. What he's describing, basically, is the origins of national Bolshevism. When he refers to communism and MAGA communism here, he's talking about Nazbolism, which, I mean, makes sense because if MAGA communists are just Nazbols. Because remember, he even said this with respect to Marxism-Leninism. That was that wasn't created by Lenin. That was created by Stalin, or at least it was formalized into set of, I don't know, principles, ideology, whatever, by Stalin when he wrote the foundations of Leninism. And Stalin himself was a national Bolshevik. At least insofar as the way he behaved with respect to statehood, statecraft, the means of production. It gets very complicated very quick, but there's a lot of similarities with what Haas is saying about the socialism in one country doctrine and the whole like national question and the aesthetics and principles of America First. There are a lot of similarities there with National Bolshevism, because it is a nationalist ideology, even if it has leftist aesthetics. So I'll let him continue here.
Illusion about this among leftists who call themselves communists is because they are influenced by the Trotskyist strain, or the kind of CIA-funded...
And here's the anti-Semitism, by the way, as well. Trotskyism is a real thing. There are Trotskyist parties out there. In fact, the leftist party in Argentina is Trotskyist. The reason that he says Trotsky was like CIA funded, whatever, that's basically a dog whistle for Jewish, because Trotsky was Jewish, and Trotsky opposed Stalin. And, you know, a lot of these guys just have like America bad brain, which on one level I don't blame them for, but this guy is not just America bad, this guy is Russia good, which is not true. But yeah, know that whatever he's about to say about Trotsky is mostly motivated, I think, by anti-Semitism or a campist opposition to anti-Stalinist dissent.
compatible left, as they say, type of Marxism. But Marxism-Leninism, foundationally, is patriotic and national informed.
Yeah, there we go.
Let me throw it to you, Trevor. What do you, I mean, you were talking about communism,
which, by the way,
Democratic Party, and
I should mention, by the way, Nazguls are the predecessors to the Nazis. The Nazis stole everything about their movement from others. They stole the name from, well, socialists and Nazguls. You can see another video of mine, but the Nazguls predated the Nazis, believe it or not. And that's where the Nazis got a lot of their stuff. This is straight away, probably.
things like that. So, how would you respond? What's your view of communism?
Well, my view of communism, as Has says, you know, what I see MAGA communism is basically an Americanized form of Duginism. So this is...
And this is actually correct. I didn't expect this to be as spot on as it is, but this guy, for all of what I'm sure are many fraudulent and pseudo-intellectual works, tendencies, takes, whatever, he is correct in saying that MAGA communism is an American form of Duginism, because Alexander Dugin is the modern sort of... I don't want to call him the father of Nazgulism, because, I mean, Nazgulism existed before him, but he's the modern iteration of the popularization of Nazgulism in Russia. I'm using a lot of political words here, but, you know, this guy is a national Bolshevik, and basically says that we should do the nationalistic politics that Haas is advocating for here. Sure, I've described Nazgulism before. Yeah, but when he says that this is American Duginism, that's
a
correct.
Movement. See, there are two strands in modern American communism. There's what I would call a feminine strand, which is wokeism.
Of course, he's taking that angle. That's
you know, like let's just accept everybody. Let's just break down the barriers. Major emphasis on anti-racism. You know, transgenderism. All these isms. These all come out of Marxism, but it is the feminine side. And Has is right. There's a big Trotsky.
Actually, no, not necessarily. Sure.
Whereas what we're talking about here is more the masculine side of communism. This is Stalinism, Stakhanovite. I can never say the word Stakhanovite communism. This is a masculine, nationalist form of communism, which overlaps to some degree with fascism. Dugin was basically trying to unite almost the right wing of communism with the left wing of fascism.
Yes. What he's describing right now, that is true. I don't know how accurately you could use the right wing or left wing of certain movements, but it is true that Duginism wanted explicitly, and he said as much, he wanted Nazbolism to be a synthesis of communism and fascism. When you do that, you just get fascism, basically. Because that's what Nazbolism is. But what he's saying about Dugin's aims for the movement and the overlap between this MAGA communism and fascism, that is correct. I don't want to give this guy more credit than he's due, because he's obviously a, like, intellectual dark web type, but I'll keep going here. I want to see what their main points are.
So what I'm seeing here in this MAGA communist movement is something that draws on Stalinism, uses the national question, and national question means that the old original Marxism was, you use the class struggle. The workers will rise up and take the control of the means of production from the bosses. The nationalities question, or the national question, is where you find minority populations or racial minorities or religious minorities, and you foster a sense of revolution amongst them, and that will be patriotic. They will play on, they use like in Ireland, they would use the patriotism of the Catholics against the Protestants. And the Stalinists for a long time tried to create a black republic in the south of America by using the sort of a nationalist sense amongst the black population. So they're doing that with Native Americans now, with La Raza, this kind of thing. So what I see here, MAGA communism to me is an amalgamation of traditional fascism and communism using nationalism and a strong masculine emphasis, which appeals to the young guys who are just sick of the feminine pansy wokeism.
Yeah.
But both wokeism and...
Okay, I should mention as well, he's gone on a little while trying to explain, trying to clarify what MAGA communism is. It is very true that MAGA communism is mostly designed to appeal to disaffected young men. That is the case for, well, a lot of ideologies, except for liberalism, because liberalism is the status quo. It doesn't need to appeal to anybody. It has historical inertia on its side. But this is where, to me, it becomes very clear that MAGA communism is just a strain of fascism or ultranationalism, is that more than just appealing to alienated or disaffected young men, it plays on their bravado and their masculine insecurities. It isn't a radical framework in the sense that it proposes a systemic and structural change to anything, really. It's just appealing to the insecurities of young men, much like garden variety fascists. It just puts a sort of red aesthetic on things, much like my critiques of what tankies do. They've effectively just painted fascism red here.
MAGA communism come out of the same root.
All right, there's a lot of isms here and a lot of proper names and nouns. So let's start from the beginning. Haas, do you think that the public, the workers, should own the means of production? How do we begin?
Yes, I believe in sovereign ownership of the means of production.
Does that mean like the state controls it, or what?
He didn't say workers.
And your views, good sir?
Wait, did he say?
State should be...
Of course, yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. He said he's
I
so.
think the state should be minimally involved in the economy. The only real role of the state is in the judicial system and in national defense. So no, I absolutely oppose state ownership.
So Haas is the kind of fascist that wants state involvement in, well, everything. He's a state capitalist. The other guy is also a state capitalist, but he wants more emphasis on the corporate form than the state form. Both these, I want to emphasize, both of these guys are fascists, but Haas is a fascist through the sort of leftist aesthetic, through Nazbolism, and wanting the state to control the means of production, a la China or the Soviet Union. And this guy, the what's his name? Trevor Loudon, there we go, it's in the title, is a fascist through wanting the state to only have the role of ensuring the property rights of corporations, which is also a form of state capitalism. The interests of the state and of private capital are one, and there's no democratic accountability in either of these systems.
Ownership of assets. I don't like public ownership of assets. And that would be, I think, the defining difference between me and Haas, is that he sees the role of a strong state, a strong, vigorous.
Although, to be clear here, if I had to pick between either of these sides, honestly, I would prefer Haas's world to this guy's world. Because in Haas's world, there's more headroom for you to argue in favor of public ownership, because things would still be nominally owned by the public and in the public interest, as opposed to owned by private capital. It would just be, rather than it being a contention between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, with the state as a separate party, it would now just be between the proletariat and the state, acting as both the state and the bourgeoisie, but with like a veneer of saying that, no, we are the proletariat. I think there's more that you can do with that than what you could do with Trevor Loudon's vision here.
State that directs production. I see exact opposite. The individual.
Sorry,
the
I'm
local
interrupting a lot.
Should direct production and own property.
Well, I actually believe sovereign ownership of the means of production precludes two things. One, what Lenin calls, and what Marx actually originated in his 18th Brumaire, is the smashing of the state machinery, that we cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state that exists, the insane bureaucracy that corresponds. And Marx actually talked about this to the capitalist society, but the state must be remade anew, simplified, made efficient, and to an extent, yes, minimalized, because it is the aspiration of communism
libertarian
to basically relegate the state to its bare necessities, and for the eventual dissolution of the state, obviously, and into free association.
You're saying
when
absolute idealistic communism is people all just agreeing and working together or something?
No. There's still a centralized oversight of production, but it's what Friedrich Engels calls the administration of things and not people. So you have a centralized oversight of production, but the necessity of the forceful suppression of opposition, for example, disappears. And this is projected to be at the time when the material foundation of the state as an organ of class dictatorship withers away. Now, many people doubt that this is possible, and it's somewhat of a theoretical and philosophical question, but as relevant now, I don't want the current American government to own more. I don't want the current American state.
Okay. I think what Haas is saying here is broadly correct. Like, it's hard to get into interpretations of theory because there's so many of them, right? And it's almost like interpretations of the fucking Bible. Like, any one of them could be correct if you interpret it a certain way, if you look at it from a certain angle. I think he's kind of twisting what Marx and even Lenin had to say about the state. The point of what Marx was saying, at the very least, I can't speak as much to Lenin because of his potential other motives, is that the state in itself is incompatible with a lot of the aims of communism, and eventually there would be a world with like mostly free association. Look, philosophy is complicated, but I think where he's incorrect is saying that like the state must be reduced to its bare necessities. That's the part where I think he's twisting this the most, because that is the world that capitalists would want. The bare necessities of the state, keep in mind, would only be the monopoly over legitimized violence. All else that the state does, anything positive that is a function of the state, is mostly secondary to maintaining a border, maintaining a military, maintaining a police force, and exercising control over the population within that border. This is the Bavarian... excuse me. This is the Weberian definition of the state, and it's the one that most it's the one that most academics use when we talk about the state and statecraft and statehood. But where I think that he's right is that like the state as is an inadequate vessel for socialist interests or communist interests, because the state in its modern form is designed by the bourgeois for the bourgeois. And obviously between now and the ideal communist world of a stateless, classless, moneyless society, you would have to have an in-between with a proletarian state, which I think would look a lot more like market socialism or even syndicalism, where basically unions are the state, or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically what he is saying about Marx here is a mixed bag, but I think he's on the money in the sense that like the libertarian vision of reducing the state is not what he's going for, at least in the long term. But again, he is a fascist, so I don't really trust a lot of what he says.
Amalgamated and centralized.
Wait, I didn't mean to do
based
that.
on completely remade state. A
There we
state
go, okay.
fashioned from the ground up based on, yes, local forms of power. Amalgamated and centralized to authentically represent the interests of the overwhelming majority. And this is where it may surprise you, it is a goal for the state to be minimally involved in production. Sovereign ownership of the means of production just means that foreigners, that private interests, cannot gobble up the resources and land of the country.
Okay, this is the Nazbolism part where he's talking about foreigners. Yeah, no. The foreigners part, that is not mentioned anywhere in the Communist Manifesto or in... Well, I haven't read Marx too much, but I can't speak to that. Private interests, when he says that they shouldn't own the means of production, that's true, but foreigners is a more Nazbol talking point, I think.
But as to how
With
who
respect to
manages
that.
that land and who sees to its production, this is something, ideally speaking, should be as local as possible. This is China's kind of household responsibility system.
Okay, what he's saying about China is absolutely false, but I do think it is generally true that while you do have to have an economy of scale, this is a globalized economy, and there's no putting that genie back in the bottle in some ways. We should try to have as much local democratic management of production as possible. That's where you get, I think, the best outcomes for people's daily lives.
Which did delegate production down to the lowest
So that is true
level,
in
the family
base.
level, and I think this is true to the aspiration of
All right.
communism.
We'll start with very simple question. What does means of production mean?
The means of production basically refer to the fundamental basis and conditions for the production of things.
Only material things? What about intellectual property?
No, there's no such thing in the Marxist view. Basically, I view personally
so you know-
intellectual property as a scam, basically. Even in terms of classical liberal values, I think it's a transgression of... I think it's completely illegitimate.
Intellectual property?
Yes.
So what about, so
Base
what's the incentive
Hosler?
then for invention if you can't own what you've invented? You have
Well-
to like hide the secrets and make sure no one ever finds out how you did it?
I believe credit can be given to people, and notoriety and fame and due glory can be given to inventors and creative geniuses. But one of the things I dislike about intellectual property is that one's product should be good on the merits. If someone can simply replicate your product, I don't think this steals anything from you. I think they're
Well,
just...
I mean, let's try this. If it was legal within the current system for people to take all of my content that I produce and immediately re-upload it wherever they wanted, I
know.
would cease to exist overnight. So, for instance, my morning show, the Tim Pool Daily Show, I produce
he's
4 segments
plugging
per
it.
day, and they're not allowed to be taken, right? It's my opinion, my commentary. There's fair use arguments, so there's a limit to people are allowed to take it, play the video and talk over it, because it's not a replication of the
Yeah.
work, it's something different. But if
That's
there
what
was
I'm doing
no
right now.
intellectual property controls, as soon as I uploaded the video, 70 other channels would upload the exact same thing. It would decentralize my ability to generate ad revenue, attention, and make money, and I'd stop doing it instantly.
So for content creators, it is a necessity right now. I'm not going to deny that. But I think with two things, the advances of technology and a transformation of the financial system. See, one of the reasons that content creators rely on intellectual property is
Oh,
they
nice.
need it to generate revenue. The means of generating revenue for someone who's uploading your content to their channel and your
No.
channel seems to be the same, right? But with, for example, innovations in the sphere of software technologies like blockchains, there are ways to verify and authenticate the original source of
But what does that mean? I mean,
The origin-
if I can't control
Right.
how the revenue generation for a piece of content, it doesn't matter if people know it's mine.
I think it can matter because if we, for example, entering into the fourth industrial revolution in a kind of post-commodity money economy, your acquisition of wealth could very well be tied to your signature, your blockchain signature, rather than simply some kind of exchange of like views for dollars.
So
for
you're
example.
saying that that signature is intellectual property. If no matter where the content is posted, the revenue comes to me.
Well, I wouldn't say it's intellectual property because there's nothing preventing someone, for just like an NFT, for example, there's nothing preventing someone for like downloading the JPEG and doing whatever they want with it. What they can't do is fake the signature.
But what does that do for the person?
Hey, this is some NFT bro shit.
It
not
gives
gonna
you a
lie.
signature. It confirms that it's yours, that this is
But
the original
how does
thing.
it buy my milk? Right? Milk, bread, and eggs. Like, are you saying, what, would the state just give me free food? Is everyone going to get free food, or?
No,
Yes, unironically, yes. Okay, in
By
a
the way,
communist world, yes, you would just get free food.
I don't. To be clear,
But that's
the
not what Haas
version
believes, so.
of the communist system of the 20th century, with rations and with standardization of basically what everyone gets based on what they do, that was a requirement for the goals of those circumstances, which was the immediate modernization of the productive forces from a backward agrarian and feudal economy. In a dynamic information-based economy, an increasingly decentralized consumer economy, for example, it's much more similar to China, where there isn't this kind of uniform compensation for what you do. It is measured based on some. So,
I'll let him keep going, but I have a couple
for
things
example,
to say. I
it
think.
can be profit, for example, is a form of the measurability of how successful you are. But I think
So let's go back to
yeah.
that point then, specifically on the intellectual property
Right.
question. If I put up a video,
Okay, I think what Haas is trying to talk about here is basically, I think that he's basically just reinventing capitalism here in some way or form, because intellectual property is not like, I agree, I think as well that shouldn't be a thing, like where you get to claim ownership of an idea. It's like, hey, I had this idea first. Cool, good for you. We'll write it down in the history books. That's it, you know. And obviously he is correct when he says that, like, is the current system right now, it's very complicated to address that. But clearly, whatever it is that we're doing right now isn't working. The concept of having intellectual property at all is I think toxic to the general well-being, because, like, think of all the things that Disney has in its intellectual property database, and how few of those are actually things created and invented by Disney. All the fairy tales, all the characters, that wasn't Disney Corporation that invented those things. That was the individual people that drew them up. Or in the case of a lot of the Disney princesses, that was like the Brothers Grimm and a lot of the fairy tales from as far back as the Middle Ages or even before. That Disney just decided to put their name and brand on and call theirs as though they invented it, which has gotten them a lot of money, but it is clearly not an adequate system for assessing, like, I don't know, meritorious behavior. It seems like the entire concept of there being intellectual property that is, like, in the current view monetizable is a big mistake. Which is obviously not to say that artists shouldn't be compensated for the work that they do, but they should be compensated for the work. That includes, you know, them coming up with some stuff, but, like, I don't know. Look, I guess I'll just defer back to the fact that it's a very complicated concept, and I don't think you're going to solve market economics with market economics here. I'd have to actually read. This is one of my, I guess, one of my blind spots is on the research pertaining to intellectual property, but on principle, as far as how I view the means of production and the ownership thereof, I don't think intellectual property should exist, because then that just creates the system by which somebody could steal something and then monetize it. If intellectual property isn't monetizable in the first place, then that problem doesn't exist. I hope that made sense. I don't know how coherent I am right now because I'm having to drive at the same time. But yeah, I think that's what I'm prepared to offer on the subject right now. Give me item. No, god damn it, he stole my item box. Okay.
that takes hours of research, and I record a live, 30 minutes. And then as soon as it uploads, 100 other people re-upload it to their accounts.
Hours of research, my
How do I
ass, by the
profit
way.
from that? Are you saying that because the content is verifiably mine, any revenue generated from anyone else just comes to me?
You have to ask the question, when we're entering into this new type of information economy.
No, they're barking up the wrong tree here. Like I said, intellectual property shouldn't be something that's monetizable in the first place. You know.
It's currently outdated how it works. We get revenue in dollars for something, a form of capital that I think is more worth more than money, right? Basically, I think clout is more valuable than money today. I don't know if you agree.
But it is. But how do you eat, right? You need money to buy food.
Yeah, that would be a question of I mean, we want to innovate everything. We're basically talking about a fourth industrial revolution. So we must also think about how to innovate the entire financial system, how money works, how currency works, and so on and so on. And yes, I do think that would be connected with things like blockchain technologies.
But
Okay, now what he's talking about here is bullshit about blockchain and crypto. That was always just a dumb pump and dump scheme. But it is true that money is always changing in the way that we conceptualize it. Right now, this is a era of fiat currency, which means that like there's not like a gold standard or anything. Currency, the value of currency has always been arbitrary. But up until I think 1970 something, the gold standard was a way to sort of tether the value of money to some physical real world object of which there was limited supply and which we all agreed had some value. Thus, you could actually compare the absolute like volume of money in circulation to the thing that you were valuing that wasn't just money. Read here, gold. But nowadays, since there's no more gold standard, currency is only valuable insofar as public trust dictates that it is valuable. And that's going to change because it actually has been like this in the past as well. There wasn't always a physical standard by which you could judge the value of money. You know? And there might come a point like that again in the future where we return to a standard like that, but right now that's not the standard.
I'm just not. I'm not sure I understand. Right? If you don't believe in intellectual property,
Yeah.
a signature that I guess I'm trying to wonder, how would I make money? I don't think you've answered it. How do I make money in a situation where
I think how
own
it would
government
work
society.
is that if you have an enterprise, and by the way, enterprise is not a dirty word. There were Soviet enterprises. You will be
All right, this is where Haas kind of gives the game away. This is the one of the big arguments for like Soviet Union not being socialist is that there was still private enterprise. You can't have private enterprise in a socialist society insofar as it exists in a capitalist society, which is to say you can't have it. It could be a market socialist version of a private enterprise, which would be to say it would be a market cooperative. But no, the Soviet enterprises that he's talking about here are state capitalist in nature, which means that they are still private companies. They're simply owned by the state or its party members, rather than non-state affiliated individuals. You know, which is a somewhat different model from capitalism in the United States, but it is a very different model from market socialism, in which the employees would actually own the enterprise, I guess. But I guess if I want to give a little bit back to Haas here, it is true that enterprise in itself isn't a dirty word. There's always going to be trade, commerce, and that sort of thing. It's just whether or not it's organized on a private or privately owned basis, or like communally owned and whatnot. Again, a lot of words being exchanged, but this is where it comes through that he like isn't really communist.
compensated with resources necessary for what you need to do based on your performance.
So resources.
So
Is that money?
if you're successful at reaching people based on your content, then you will be compensated with some kind of you could call it money, you could call it Marx theorized about labor vouchers, you could talk
Yeah, there we go.
about
Okay.
tokens.
Labor vouchers is
So that is a real thing, and then
effectively currency with
You- yeah, you
restricted
can-
currency.
Yeah, it can be called whatever, but yes, effectively you can be compensated with some kind of means of acquiring more based on what you put in.
Money.
Sure.
okay, this is a big thing. Labor vouchers are currency, but they're not money. And this is a big thing that Haas made the mistake of agreeing with here. I don't know if he might believe that, but the big difference between just regular money like United States, a good old stack of greenbacks or whatever, and labor vouchers is that money can become and is in certain forms capital. The big difference between currency and money in this instance is that money can be reinvested. That is where that's where you get a lot of problems of capitalism, is that you can buy necessities with money, but you can also make your money work to make more money. And this is what capitalists do because they have so fucking much money, usually from stealing from stealing from people below them. But with labor vouchers, you would not be able to do that. You wouldn't be able to do the same thing. They would be, like I think they mentioned a little bit earlier, it would be more restrictive how you could use them. And when I say more restrictive, I don't mean that they would specifically prescribe what you could buy with them. It would just be that you can't engage in a sort of reinvestment scheme. You would be able to buy things, but those things would be like, I don't know. They would be, food. They would be like, I don't know, household objects, books, other items, I suppose. Even more luxurious commodities. So long as I think the key element that you want to prevent is the exchanging of things that aren't your labor for labor vouchers, because labor vouchers should be earned purely through doing labor, and your labor should be enough to sustain your existence in society. Like, you shouldn't have to rely on money simply as a representation of an abstract value. It should be more like we have labor values, which is a ideally like one-to-one representation of labor, which is enough for everybody to get by. Whereas with money, you can work your ass off at 3 jobs and that still not be enough. And again, mostly because you're not you don't own any of the means of production. Again, I hope this makes sense. This is I'll be honest, I have a hard time sometimes engaging with the more esoteric elements of theory. This one was like not as bad, but the more you get into the weeds, the more difficult it gets. I think that's pretty standard for a lot of people, but
Sure, you can call it that. I think the one.
So then, if
the reason,
if
yeah.
the signature only applies to me personally, that means I own that signature and have ownership of the content that I produce. Because if it's reposted anywhere, but it all reverts to my signature and compensates me, that means I own the intellectual property.
Right, but this is a form of effective ownership. It's not a form of ownership enforced by a third party. It's a form of ownership that is self-evident in the product. So, for example, I own my personality. I don't need to have the government say, this is Oz's personality, no one else can have it. As an original person, it's a form of effective...
What if someone takes the content, inverts the colors, generating a separate key, and then directs the key to themselves to generate revenue? Would there be an adjudicating force?
I think unfortunately, I do believe in a harshness of reality where if this is what people prefer and they like it better, you have to step up your game. So
the issue is in a reality where
what Tim is actually arguing against here is I mean, it's valid, but he's fundamentally arguing against certain market principles. What he's referring to here is like, what if you just made it photo negative? Is that still like fair game or whatever? Yeah, it would be, because nobody wants to watch a fucking photo negative video. I think what Haas is saying here is correct in that, like, you owning your own personality is pretty self-evident because it's you. It's discernibly you. If somebody else uploads that video of you, it's like, well, that's not them. That's you.
Someone can spoof a key or alter the content in such a way that it's not transformative, doesn't fall under fair use. Like, they're literally just trying to repurpose the existing.
At the point that Tim Pool is talking about, it would take less effort to make something original than it would be to plagiarize like this. Although, of course, we know that people are willing to go to some pretty big lengths to plagiarize. From the, H Bomber guy video that came out recently, but I don't know. I don't want to rely too much on people's knowledge of other YouTube videos. Baby Park. Ow. Oh, dude, that red shell hit both of us. That's pretty funny. What's up, Dio? Oh, shit! I actually got him from the side. That's pretty cool.
Existing content. Let's just put it this way. They find a way to bypass the blockchain signature by, like, I don't know, dropping the pitch by a half step or altering the colors, and then they start getting the money from it. I cease
Yeah.
to exist overnight. This content doesn't happen.
Again, perhaps under the current circumstances, that's the case for all content creators, but I think we should be a little more appreciative of the possibility that in the future, things will not work the same way as they do now.
Trevor, do you want to jump in on this communism?
Well, I think this is the main mistake of Marxism. They assume that human consciousness is shaped by the material environment. So if
Human
we can
consciousness
change the
is shaped by the
environment,
material
if we can
environment
have
in which we live.
new technology, human behavior is going to change. Human incentives are going to change. I think that's
Okay, no, that's not what Marx means when he says, like, the material environment and stuff. I mean, like, it is true that the technology that we have at our disposal dictates how we behave because it dictates what is or isn't possible for us to do. But what Marx means more so is material incentive structures, which means that, like, you know, cause and effect, X or Y will happen if I do this thing. I don't know exactly what his argument is because he hasn't finished, but I have a feeling that it's going to just go further down the rabbit hole of being blatantly anti-empiricist.
complete fallacy. You know, intellectual property is what drove the Industrial Revolution.
No, it fucking isn't. No, never let anybody tell you this. The Industrial Revolution was driven by a rapid advance in technology that is not easily attributable to any group of people as like a handful of individuals, but rather, you know, collective human understanding of things. And it was also driven by, well, new and changing material circumstances. There's a reason that a lot of historians actually talk about the nitrogen cycle, and that's because for a long time there was this the nitrogen cycle prevented food production from surpassing a certain limit. And when we found out how to manipulate that cycle a little bit, that enabled us, you know, with industrially produced fertilizer, that enabled the human population to explode because of how much food we could produce. That is an example of material circumstances shaping human existence and human existence shaping material circumstances. It's a feedback loop. It is not some, like, great man theory, John, like, nobody knew what fertilizer was until John Fertilizer invented fertilizer, and all that, and his specific knowledge of this. Like, no. You know, that's a load of shit. Oh.
It wasn't the cotton gin. It wasn't the steam engine. It was patents. It was the banking system. It was the derivatives, the stock market, that all these things that were driven by intellectual property rights, that were not just, you know, a book or a machine.
The stock market has had an influence in the financial system, but outside of that, its material impact on the means that have been available to us to live has been pretty minimal. It has a lot of impact on the hierarchical structures of human society because it's like a psychological feedback loop or whatever, but the cotton gin and these material inventions, these material things, machines, absolutely were driving forces in the Industrial Revolution as much as they were products of it. To argue otherwise is pretty stupid, I think.
Machine or a forest or whatever, they were actually intellectual property. Now, so in the future, human nature is not going to change. Human nature's been human nature.
Oh boy,
forever.
the human nature
Humans
arguments.
respond to personal incentive. That's how we're
is true.
programmed to be. And the problem is, whenever the communists will say, well, we're going to change the material form of existence, and that's going to change the nature of man, and we're going to live, we can have a cooperative environment, we can have incentives that aren't directly monetary, all this kind of thing. It's all untrue. Nothing will change about human nature. Nothing at all. So you design a system of liberty where human nature can blossom, where people can build their own farm, they can build their own business, they can build their own podcast. It's theirs. They control it. See, if you have some, as Haz was talking about, you'll be competent.
Damn, that's crazy. I didn't know if we handed off all the fucking intellectual property to John intellectual property. That's actually what makes history move forward, and not collective discoveries of communities that spread over time and shape the lives of millions when they become widespread and adopted. Didn't know that the Protestant Reformation was actually due to entirely Martin Luther just by himself, and not let's say the invention of the printing press, which enabled the ideas that started with Martin Luther but could have started with literally anybody to spread throughout the entirety of Europe at a literally unprecedented rate.
Compensated if your stuff is good. Well, who decides that? It's going to be a collective that decides that. Back in the Soviet Union under Stalin, they had the Writers Guild, the Writers Collective. And there were certain writers who were favored by the Soviet state that lived quite comfortably. They got royalties from their poetry. They got royalties from their plays.
Yeah, that's called actually called capitalism.
And
the private ownership of intellectual property by a few individuals and their favorship in the state.
But only if you conformed to the state. If you were a dissident.
Or to be more accurate and more specific, it is state capitalism, as opposed to market capitalism, which is a prevailing system in a lot of parts of the world.
In any way, you either risk jail or you lost your position.
Have I
you
played this
lost
track
your
before?
privileged position. So this is the beauty of freedom. You can come out with an idea
Okay, so he's
or
just...
a product, and the state cannot interfere with you. But if you have...
Yes, they can, by the way. It's the state's job to do that. The state creates laws. He's arguing against the concept of a modern society with laws. That's what he's arguing against here. Now, does he believe this? No. He wants a world where the capitalists have a completely unmitigated playground in order to screw over whatever group of people they please, and to make however much money in however unethical a way as they please. And in order to do that, you actually need the force of law to prevent a popular uprising and to ensure the property rights of those corporations. So, it's talking lots of shit here. Is what he's doing. I'm going to use this so I can...
If other people can decide that other than your customers, it is only going to be those who curry favor with the establishment or the existing social order that are going to prosper. Freedom gives people the freedom to be stupid, to be creative, to have any idea they want, and the market determines whether that idea is good or not. Any form of collectivism destroys that. And that is the engine of human progress and the engine of human creativity.
So, I want to say three things. The first thing is that I agree that to the furthest extent, which is why I oppose intellectual property. Intellectual property requires the state to enforce property rather than an effective form of property.
Thank you, Oz.
And I think this is why even many free market libertarians believe in open source, because intellectual property requires in a feudal-like way some kind of political authority to enforce the economic reality. Whereas the ideal for a free market capitalist is that the economy works on its merits. It works by itself. It doesn't require third-party intervention to uphold. Even in the enforcement of property rights like land, some libertarians go as far as to say, I should be able to have a nuclear silo in my backyard to protect my sovereign ownership of land.
Real
so you
and
don't
true.
need this decentralized state to enforce your property according to that ideal. It works just by itself. The second thing I would like to say is I disagree with the view that some kind of centralized legislative or political body would have to determine exactly how much someone is compensated for. And I think, basically, it's simple. AI today has the ability to kind of calculate based on algorithms you can put in.
So a human does that, though.
Right, but yes, of course, the system is designed by a human, but the system can also work by itself, that you are rewarded for how much output you produce, basically. So this can be measured and this can be kind of mathematicized. So, secondly...
I got to stop you there.
Yeah.
It cannot be, right? So we've seen what happens when humans try to create an artificial intelligence or algorithm to determine output, and what you end up with was Elsevier on YouTube. YouTube said, we want long form, we want keywords, we want to put in all these parameters. Basically what they did was they looked at what was working on Netflix and YouTube, and they said, these are the key components of succccessful content, fed that to the algorithm, and then what happened was people started putting out videos of Hitler with a woman's body doing Tai Chi with the Incredible Hulk, while someone sang nursery rhymes. So that doesn't work.
AI definitely has the potential to run amok and produce undesirable outcomes, but let's ask ourselves, what was the purpose of that kind of algorithm? It was just to maximize viewership and engagement, specifically targeting children. Is that a goal as a society we want to have? That children's attention is fixated on their screens and on YouTube? Probably not. So obviously there is a human element, but when it comes to the economy, we all hate BlackRock. I'm not a fan of BlackRock. but I do appreciate
True.
innovations in the productive forces. Already, this is how it works. Our retirement funds, basically, that's what BlackRock mostly manages, by the way, can calculate already.
It's
This
pretty
is how
scary to
the
think about.
current so-called capitalist economy works. The profitability of a given enterprise determines how much is invested in it. So already, this kind of feedback loop, the foundation and material basis of communism, is already here. Now, we don't like ESG scores and how they're being used, but that's a question of who controls the means of production, not necessarily a question of the technology itself. And thirdly, this is the kind of last point I'd like to say, I actually disagree that in the Soviet Union, because of a problem of human nature, there was a lack of incentive. I think since the beginning of time that is recorded for human history, a true artist aspires
let him go on
toward
for a little
glory,
longer.
recognition, and for their product, for their work to be realized at all costs. I believe you are a kind of fan of Ayn Rand. Would I be correct?
Well,
Say-
she was I really admired her.
Yeah.
She was a foundational thing for me, yeah.
Well, even Ayn Rand actually can appreciate this irreducible human striving to produce the work for its own sake. I mean, Atlas Shrugged, wasn't it about an architect? It wasn't even about
No, the Fountainhead was about
Fountainhead,
the
yes.
architect,
It was about an architect who was actually focused on their art above all else, right? So I think when someone engages in the production of art and creativity just for the sake of getting rich, I don't really think that's the sign of a powerful artist. I think
That's true. I think what Haas is getting at here is definitely a good argument to bring up, that like if we're being concerned about intellectual property in this way that we're that they've been discussing here is really barking up the wrong tree, where like if you're worried about compensation and intellectual property in the sense of who makes money from art, you're almost asking the wrong question and you're focusing on the wrong thing, because the purpose of art is not profiteering or whatever. There are some people that are career artists and whatever, and I think that obviously that has its place in society, and then there needs to be a system thought up to accommodate that. But having the system of intellectual property, having intellectual property at all, encourages the kind of behavior that we see, where people get into ostensibly artistic professions mostly to make money, rather than to produce the art itself. Ideally you should be drawing for the sake of drawing. You should be animating because you have something in mind that you want to animate, and it would look cool when it's done. Again, I think labor vouchers would apply here, where if there's like a collective of artists that does a thing, you could be given labor vouchers to enable your existence while you do the thing that you love, because art does provide something of non-monetary value to society ultimately. But yeah, I think art as a commodity is the wrong way to approach the subject here. And I think Haas is correct in pointing that out. Yeah. And I'll say as well, I think it's quite telling that Tim Pool always approaches it from that angle, because to him, this show that he is doing is just to make money. He doesn't really have any real, like, philosophically held beliefs. He might actually have some like burning hatred and passion in his heart or whatever for X, Y, or Z thing, but ultimately he's in this to make money, and that's all that matters to him.
a powerful artist puts their work
I went
before
really
anything.
wide
And this
there.
is why Soviet artists, this is why Steven Spielberg himself said, Soviet films and cinema is better than Hollywood. Because actually the restrictions of the market and having to focus on profit margins wasn't there. So artists were free to actually
That's true.
pursue a creative vision completely freely in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but there's pros and cons to that. I mean, without any kind of mechanism for incentive, you'll end up with a bunch of weird, crazy garbage with an
Weird, crazy garbage is what Tim Pool thinks of art. Very cool. No, it is absolutely true that the monetary incentives of Hollywood are a crippling blight on what would otherwise be, a truly massive industry of artists. And when I say industry, I mean in the sense of a group of very, very many people all doing similar or the same craft. Not like a production industry that is interested in making product to be consumed and profiteered off of and things like that. This is, in fact, Jackie Chan, as much as he has done like questionable stuff. One of the reasons I respect him as an artist is because of like the things he has to say about the Hong Kong film industry, where there are, although like there's still like this is a market economy and there are some restrictions still, the value in Hong Kong is more on the art than the profit, or at least it was when he was making movies, and that enabled him to make pretty much what he wanted to make rather than what the studios permitted him to make. You know, and it's that sort of incentive structure that we need to be optimizing for here in the States, instead of this, you know, routinely cranked out gray goop garbage that's just there to get a return on investment for the shareholders. You know, think of movies like The Flash and Justice League and all the stuff that was clearly just there for somebody to walk home with their nice bonus check and things like that. That stuff wouldn't exist in a world without, like, you know, a world without these toxic incentive structures, or with different incentive structures. But I think I've belabored the point.
Privatization model, you end up with Marvel movies. These like
okay, yeah, there
cookie cutter, bland ABC storylines that eventually people are just like, okay, we get it. You made the same movie 15 times. So there needs to be a balance. I wonder if the real issue is simply cultural. If you look back at
okay,
the 80s into the 90s
this is where he just starts going like, it's because the West is degenerate, the West has fallen, blah blah. No, it's actually because of material incentive structures that create the circumstances under which you have to make a movie that is more product than art.
There are so many movies that they're trying to reboot and recreate because we loved them so much. And then today you look at the movies they make and it's like Transformers 12 and you know, Marvel 16 and just cookie cutter garbage.
But if I may say so, you know, I know I'm biased here, but at least this is my opinion and my taste. I think an exception standing out to this kind of nostalgia industry, the Disneyfication of all of media, is Chinese cinema, particularly Chinese science fiction. I've watched both movies, The Wandering Earth 1 and 2, and people accuse the Chinese cinema of being bland and just kind of blockbuster disaster movies, which it has been maybe for a few decades, but I think these movies have a soulfulness and have a kind of spirit to them, which authentically tries to capture the moment we're living in now, to envision the future. Today, what cinema and what movies really speak to an embrace of the future and the present moment? We're trying to go back to the 80s, to our childhood, to the 90s, and we don't have an ability to bravely see through some kind of way to make meaning and beauty out of the future ahead of us. So I think communism actually, to me, is a part of that aesthetic striving of having a responsibility before our collective future.
I think one of the big issues is multiculturalism, and the component of it being, you may have seen these videos on, you know, Instagram or YouTube where, actually Instagram, massive, no one talks. They have, there'll be like a woman, a guy.
This is just Tim Pool saying some Nazi shit, right? This is Tim Pool, like, saying the cultural Marxism, the cultural Bolshevism has destroyed the West, or whatever the hell. Because multiculturalism is like good. Like, ethno-states are bad, and having multiple cultures in one state is pretty cool. Or in one region, whatever. Remember, if anybody brings up cultural factors as a reason why, like, XYZ thing is the way it is, from a perspective of, like, actually addressing it, ostensibly, they're not actually interested in addressing it. They're interested in dog whistling about the Jews.
It will do something, maybe like a magic trick or something like this, and the woman will have this crazy expression on her face because they're trying to convey an emotion without language, because they're trying to appeal to the widest basis, the biggest base imaginable. If you make lowest common denominator content, the ideas are all stripped out. You're not going to get well thought out linguistic works. You're going to get a guy throwing a football at another guy's groin, and then a woman going like, "Wow!" And then everybody, that's going to get.
My mans has never encountered long form content with translation before.
More shares, because it's not that it's better. It's not that it's good artistic content. It's that if 90% of any culture hates it, but 10% of every culture likes it, that's going to be more views, more money, more incentive. And so determining value is relatively difficult today. And trying to figure out how we make good artistic works, I wonder if the challenge is simply, this is why my focus is always cultural. I don't think there's a governmental or
Yeah, because Tim Pool isn't actually interested in fixing the problem, you see. He's interested in compartmentalizing the problem to, well, somebody's skin color, gender, or sexual orientation, so that he can say, if only these people weren't in our society, or hint at, like, if only they weren't in our society or didn't get the special treatment or whatever, then we wouldn't be having this problem. Which is Nazi shit.
Regulatory solution to all the problems people keep complaining about. It's totally cultural problems. If everybody... I tell people this, communism works 100% very easily, so long as everyone agrees with it. The problem is humans don't agree with everything, and you'll always end up with very...
No. I don't know if I've ever even heard of this before, like communism works if everybody agrees with it. He would not make this argument for capitalism, because it's not true there either. No ideology is contingent on everybody agreeing with it in order for it to work. Communism, as a set of organizing principles, works if those principles are put into practice. Like, people don't always actively agree with everything that, like, the current system does, but people can say that the current system works insofar as doing X, Y, and Z, and that can be true. This is just a dumb argument from Tim. Around this corner
various amounts
How
of
am I in
dissent.
first?
The problem for any kind of system that seeks to have a purity within it
just threw
is
it away.
that there is only one solution to undesirables. With a system like, classical
brother in
liberal
Christ, you are
constitutional
describing
republicanism,
fascism.
or these fields of liberal values, true liberal, not like modern American liberal, is that we tolerate dissent to varying degrees, which allows people and ideas to compete, and then certain ideas improve.
Can I jump in here? Because, look.
This is like Cold War tier communism is when no freedom argument. Just no engagement with the, like, actual arguments that Haas actually made, which is that, like, the organizing principles and material incentives of the economy would have to be different to nudge people in the direction of behaving differently, rather than behaving in very cynical, profit-oriented ways and whatever. Because Haas actually has, I think, read some theory. Like, can't believe I'm defending Haas here. Well, I mean, I can believe it. He's on the Tim Pool show. Of course, he would be probably less insane than Tim Pool, but...
Haas is right. In the Soviet era, there were some great movies made. There was great ballet. The Soviets put a lot of emphasis on culture, but within limits. If you were a poet like Pasternak, who talked about lyricism and beauty and whatever, he was tolerated. But anybody who talked about politics or any form that was opposed to Stalin, you went to the camps. Like Mandelstam went to the camps. Like
that is true.
Akhmatova was persecuted.
But then again, I don't have a problem acknowledging that, because the Soviet Union wasn't socialist. They were just a different kind of capitalist, with a lot more fascistic structures and political incentives. And a lot more suppression of dissent.
Vitava, etc. The reason we have lost our way in the culture here is because we've had so much
the West has
Marxist
fallen.
influence in
Billions
Hollywood,
must
so much
marble
Marxist
statue.
influence in the churches, so much Marxist influence in education, that the American values that people...
By the way, that's the ultimate dog whistle right there. I was going to say I can practically hear the triple parentheses coming out of his mouth, and then he said Marxism in education. That is the number one dog whistle throughout, like, the history of anti-Semitism, is that they're indoctrinating the young people, they being Jews, from, the Frankfurt School of Intellectuals, because I guess a lot of Jewish scholars went to the Frankfurt School back in the day, to, like, the cultural Marxism now, and like, Marxist college professors and whatever. Whenever somebody brings that up about, like, Marxism in the education system and whatever, they're talking about the Jews. Or they're just talking about teachers that don't unabashedly push right-wing dogma into their curriculum as fact.
People grew up with in the 50s and the 60s that were optimistic.
But usually it's the
America's
Jews
great, freedom's
that
great,
they're
we're going
referring
to
to.
lead the world. They have been so denigrated and so crushed that all it is left is this nihilistic, gangster type of culture, these bland...
Of course, we got to throw
insipid
black people in there
movies that
too.
come out of Hollywood. Look, in the 50s and the 60s,
Oh, and Jews
that was
again,
the
Hollywood.
golden age of American art, of American culture. Now, I'm not saying we should go back to that. We should go back to the system that produced it. We should have freedom. You
So
cannot make
segregation,
certain
you mean?
movies in Hollywood now. You
Oh, yeah.
cannot have certain comedy acts. You cannot say certain things. You look at Monty
Yeah, you
Python
can't say the N-word
in the
anymore.
80s, and the things they used to say
What a
that
tragedy.
you cannot say now. Because
but-
that is all cultural Marxism. And has
Oh, and then you just says cultural Marxism
when he
outright,
says
alright.
that Marxism, that wokeness
Making my
is
job
not
pretty
Marxism.
easy.
Wokeness is 100% Marxist. It is cultural Marxism. It's drawn from the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So we've got this feminized Marxism that has wrecked our institutions, wrecked our colleges, wrecked our movie industry, and now Has is coming up.
I feel like there was half a dozen dog whistles about the Jews in the span of like 30 seconds. He mentioned colleges, and then he mentioned like fucking what else did he mention? Art and like, well, then he said he name dropped cultural Marxism, which is another one, and then he mentioned higher
With
education.
a sort of masculine communism, which appeals to people who are sick of the feminist pansy wokeism. But it's two false alternatives here.
Le
We
wokisme.
had a
I-
system that worked well, and Marxism is destroyed.
Fucking hell,
I
dude.
think the issue is,
How far am
there
I
are a lot
into
of
this?
practical arguments for. I
38
don't like using the word
minutes.
communism because
Fantastic.
it's a reference to a historical like phase, and we can talk about maybe distributed or public ownership of the means of production or whatever that may be or whatever. But there are a lot of interesting questions, and I'll give you one anecdote.
Then
that,
maybe you should
was,
talk
was
about
probably formative
public
for me when I was
ownership of the
younger.
means of production.
I met a
That'd be
homeless guy
pretty
in
good.
Chicago. I
That's
had
what
some pizza left
communism is.
over, and I'm like skating down the street, and I had like a half pizza in a box. And I saw this guy. And,
Oh my God,
he
he's
said-
so
like, "What up?" And I was
young
like,
and
"Hey, man, you
hip.
hungry?"
He's
And he was like, "Yeah, I'm
skateboard-
hungry." I was like, "You want some
yeah,
pizza?" He's
okay.
like, "Hell yeah!" And so I gave him the pizza, and then I was like, "Can I ask you a question?" And he's like, "Sure, shoot." And I asked him why he was homeless. The story was actually simple. He worked at the post office his whole life. Eventually, they closed his post office down. He was too old to find any kind of other job or meaningful work. He searched, he couldn't. Eventually, his savings dried up. He couldn't pay his rent. They evicted him. Here he is, homeless. I said, "What about friends and family?" He said, "Man, I'm old. They're all dead." He's like, my family's dead. I didn't have a brother and sister or something like that. He's like, "My friends, lost all of them." And so I thought to myself, here's a guy who is a trained master postman. He has every skill we have asked of him. He has done everything we as a society have asked of him. And then one day, we decided he was obsolete. And there was no mechanism by which to allow him to continue to function faithfully in society. And so I thought to myself, like, well, we can't have that. If there are people who have jobs that become obsolete, and then for that they now have no access to society's resources, we are going to get violence and revolution and chaos when jobs start to disappear. I'm not saying I have an answer for this. I'd say that's something that gave me pause and made me wonder, like, what do we do to solve a problem like that?
So
Well, it isn't a problem.
So I think
Well, there's. It is a problem.
I have an answer to that, but Has is.
I'd like to brief.
Did he just say that isn't a problem? I feel like I feel like that guy just said that isn't a problem. Where I don't know if Tim Pool is like making up that example or not, but there are certainly many people who end up in circumstances like that through like through no fault of their own, and like again, I know Tim Pool is evoking this like very disingenuously here, but like yeah, you do need to have an answer for that. It's almost like you should accommodate people based off of what they need, even to each according to his needs. You might even say.
briefly respond to
Yeah.
actually
I
what
don't know
both
if
of
you
you
go
have
that
said
far.
regarding liberalism and Marxism and so on, and I think I can condense this into one point. One of the things I probably disagree with, and it's maybe ironic because it's the communists in America who are thought of as utopians and idealists. I actually consider myself a pragmatist and a materialist, which means I believe in getting things done. I believe in a sobering acceptance of reality as it is, not as I want it to be. And part of that means I have to appreciate, for example, I cannot accept this notion of a pure liberalism, which I think is at the root of much of this disagreement. It may have been true, as you said before, that liberalism promotes this ability to kind of be outside the system maybe and disagree with a hegemony of some kind, but it's because of the contradictions of liberalism itself that we have entered the kind of authoritarianism, which I think you misidentify as Marxism. What you call Marxism is a result of liberalism's own contradictions. And what is this contradiction? Liberalism, which promotes freedom, has no positive content of freedom. What does freedom look like, right? And once you have,
That's
for example,
true.
perceived sociological, cultural, even economic, political structures which stand in the way of this liberal freedom, these become enemies of the liberal society. The conservative family becomes an enemy of liberal society. The remnants
Okay,
of
now
cultural
he's talking
differences
some
between
shit.
different groups becomes an enemy of liberal society. Because remember, it's a value of liberalism, radical liberalism, that all distinctions of the standing in the way between individuals dissolves, and one is just an individual. All collective
So
identities.
there might be like one or two theorists that agrees with Haas like distilling liberalism to just the individualist element of it, but I think ultimately what he's talking about for the second half of that is not true about like, oh, the conservative family becoming the enemy of liberalism. Liberalism is perfectly fine with the conservative family model, um, being like paterfamilias or whatever. But where he is correct there, and then I'll come back to the stuff where I don't agree. Where he is correct is that liberalism like does not provide an image of positive freedom necessarily. What he said is that like it has no positive view of freedom or something like that. Liberalism concerns itself mainly with negative freedoms. You are not restricted from doing anything, but it doesn't focus very much on positive freedom, which is you are enabled by existing systems and structures that we have that are capable of supporting you to do these other things. You know, things that you may want to do, things that you may need to do. Those are not necessarily there in a liberal system. The freedom to live is not a freedom inherent to liberalism, while the freedom to die is. If that makes sense. You know, it's the freedom to versus freedom from. Liberalism does like giving people the freedom from certain things, freedom from persecution in a lot of cases. That's one of the better tenets of liberalism, is the freedom from, well, a lot of more tyrannical structures and elements, although even then sometimes it fails to deliver. But where myself and other socialists would argue we need to take it a step further is that there needs to be positive freedom as well. There need to be structures that enable you to do things that we should allow and enable people to do in a complex society such as this. Let me continue here.
All collective forms of existence are regarded as an obstacle to the realization of the total freedom. So paradoxically, liberalism, whose value is libertarian and
I'll agree with the hyper-individualism stuff being a valid critique of liberalism, but I think that like the whole well, no, you know what? As far as economic liberalism is concerned, I think I agree with him. Given the atomization of people's existence out in the world and the disincentivization of relying on others for help and recognition and things like that. Barely got that out in time. But as far as the social values that he claims liberalism supports, with the family unit being one of them, I think that much is not true, specifically with the conservative family. The extended family, I think liberalism does actually discourage, but that is not the conservative family. The conservative image of the family, the nuclear family, is actually a pretty recent thing. And that is actually encouraged by liberalism, because right now it's the smallest unit to which society writ large can atomize people without them being so antisocial that they become dysfunctional in their entirety. Like, yeah, I think that's as much sense as I can make.
letting people do what they want becomes its opposite, authoritarianism. And Dugan, I don't agree with the view that I am just an American.
I was just thinking of one of the things I was thinking of when I was talking about hyper-individualism there is Sweden, where like you're basically beyond the age of 18, you're very heavily discouraged from staying with your family, not by any law, mind you, not by government laws or mandates or whatever, but by social norms. And sometimes the liberal social norms can be harmful, but I think more often than not, the laissez-faire attitude of liberalism that you should live and let live is generally accurate. And that taken on its own, if you are interpreting that properly, that has no potential whatsoever to get in the way of other people's free association, because that's exactly what they should be doing. If people decide that they still like their family and want to associate with their family, then that is perfectly in keeping with and encouraged by liberal individualist values, if that makes sense. This isn't meant to be like a comprehensive defense or takedown of liberalism. This is where I agree with Haas versus where I don't disagree, and ultimately I think he's more correct when he's arguing against liberalism than these guys would be in arguing against communism, I think.
Duganist.
No, I don't say just,
Because-
but I'm saying there's an influence.
Right. The influence is there. I acknowledge that influence. And one of the influences I think he renders quite succinctly that liberalism must become itself the ultimate totalitarianism, because this abstract notion of freedom, because it's not concrete freedom, befitting of a concrete existence of a people. It's just abstract freedom of the individual, must actually become totalitarian and enforce this freedom at the expense of our human nature, I think. So the wokeness in Hollywood and the kind of cheapening of... Also, you mentioned in the 50s and 60s this was the golden age
No, what the fuck?
of liberalism. I disagree.
Oh, that's so bad.
But I disagree, because in the 50s and 60s, remember, this is fresh off the boat of the New Deal,
drive
and
right.
actually the response to the failure of liberalism in 1929. And paradoxically, with neoliberalism, the economic liberalization of the economy, that's when we got all of this kind of cultural authoritarianism and restrictions.
That and everyone knows the 80s were way better. Your decades are wrong.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Well, I'll define what I am. You talk about liberalism. I'm an American constitutionalist. The government should be bound down by the chains of the Constitution. That has economic benefits, and that establishes a system of property ownership, property rights protection, right to self-defense, Second Amendment, etc.
No,
But that is not. But that doesn't mean you don't have social institutions. You have churches, you have friendly societies, you have all sorts of institutions where both an individual and a collective being. But this is the whole point. Freedom does not lead to tyranny. Tyranny leads to tyranny. You talk about the New Deal. That was when basically the communists ran Hollywood. The communists ran the Roosevelt administration.
Okay, here we go. I was gonna say it's not really. This guy isn't really saying anything, I think, right now, but he's just gone back to the old anti-Semitic refrains, I guess. So about what you can expect from
which
this type of
flooded
guy.
the country with thousands of left-wing writers and socialists, etc., which had a very bad effect on the culture. Look, it is not about the economics isn't the key factor here. The key factor is human liberty, and human liberty cannot be guaranteed in any form of collective system, whether it's fascism, socialism, communism. Human liberty can only be guaranteed in a constitutional system where the government is limited to its bare functions, which is national defense, suppression of crime, justice
No.
system, etc.
I've already explained why this is like the state being reduced to its bare functions is bad, because the bare functions all revolve around the use of violence against its population, whether we deem that violence to be acceptable or not. No, the state literally, in order to ensure freedom, the state needs to, as long as we have a state, it needs to provide social programs and benefits beyond the bare function of the state. In fact, you want the bare function of the state to be as minimal as possible. You want the other functions of the state to be as prominent as possible. You want a strong post service. You want a strong welfare system. You want a strong reformative rehabilitation system, not even a prison system necessarily. You want a strong education system. You do not want a strong police system, because then you get police brutality. You get basically the systemic problems that we're experiencing with the police right now. You do not want a strong military. Obviously, in the current world, that much is unavoidable, given that we still rely on a degree of the military being in the background to enforce our hegemony on the world stage. But in a world where that's not a consideration, you do not want a strong military. It's just a matter of there being other states that are operating off of basically the same philosophy of wanting a strong police force, military, etc. As well as, of course, the interest of private property that are very happy to keep the police around to defend them. I took that turn really wide.
That allows the churches to flourish. That allows the social institutions, the friendly societies, the community groups. That allows the flowering of civil society.
Let me ask you: do you think that people should have a right to be obscene in their language in entertainment?
Well, if in a private setting, of course.
But you mean
private
like a
setting,
comedian
oh
should
boy.
be able to go on stage and start saying all the nastiest things he
Yeah,
wants?
absolutely.
Well, in the 50s and 60s, that was illegal.
Yeah, in certain places it was. I'm not saying that was that was perfect at that time. Lenny Bruce pushed back against that kind of thing.
Right.
In a
George
private,
Carlin famously arrested.
Exactly. In a private setting, in a private club, you should be able to say what you want to say. That's
So the reason I bring this up is going back to the 50s and 60s and 70s, and even to the 80s, it has been a gradual transformation in our culture to allow more and more of what culturally we would describe as obscene, to the point now where we have child drag shows, children ripping their clothes off on stage for cash.
Okay,
so there's a
Initially, I was going to say, Tim has a valid point about, like, obscenity being not something you want to legislate, but then he just went into the drag fucking talking points about shit that isn't happening, so we're back to right-wing bullshit of the week, number 340-something.
I hear a lot of this, both from you, Haz, and Trevor. And to me, everything just comes back to, is a group of people aligned culturally? Because then there's no question. If you've
My man's all about the cultural preservation. He ought to be living in France with the French far right. A fate worse than death, you see.
if you had 100 people and they were all communists, pure, genuine communists working with each other, you've got no issues. In fact, there's actually a commune in the United States that caps out at 100 people. If someone leaves, they'll allow someone to come in. If people don't tolerate the communist structure, they ask them to leave and replace them with someone else. And it functions well because they've culturally homogenized their community.
Okay, no. Now Tim is actually arguing in favor of Nazbolism, which is not all too surprising because ideologically he agrees with that. The ideological prescriptions that I believe he has is like being anti-Semitic, or like he basically has all of the wrong social prescriptions, but he has to like cover them in such a way that it'd be acceptable for YouTube.
In the United States, we can talk about all the
More or
great works
less.
that were happening, but it was enforced cultural homogenization in that it's not absolutely right. There's dialects, there's different styles. You go to one area.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to do that.
You say that it's the communists who have infiltrated the system.
How far would
That's when we got all of this kind of cultural authoritarianism and restriction.
And that establishes a system of property ownership, property rights protection, right to self-defense, Second Amendment, etc. But that is not. But that doesn't mean you don't have social institutions. You have churches. You have friendly
so
societies.
let's pass this part.
This is the whole point. Freedom does not lead to tyranny. Tyranny leads to tyranny. You talk about the new demonstration writers and socialists, etc., which had a very about those shouldn't happen now because we have laws to protect children. But if the adults want to do a drag, which you do now in China, in China you can be a Christian, just an artist or someone who really is on fire.
Not only will you be arrested, some people might beat the living crap out of you.
Yep.
So you had, I mean, look, people talk about this. If a child drag show happened in the 50s,
Okay.
I don't
so
know
now
if
we're
those
back
people
to
who were
Tim
putting that show on
Pool
would make it out
talking about
alive.
cultural war bullshit.
Well, look, a child drag show shouldn't happen now because we have laws to protect children. But if the adults want to do a drag show, they can do it whatever they like. Yes, there was cultural repression. There were laws that shouldn't have been there. But there's also social pressures. And a cohesive society will have social pressures. And as Haz says, an artist or someone who really is on fire for an idea or an artwork will defy those social pressures. And that drives social progress. But when you get legislation, which you did in the Soviet Union, which you do now in China, in China you can be a Christian, but the Bible is actually changed to worship the state, not Jesus. You can do all sorts of things in China as long as
I don't
it's
know if
within
he's
the parameters.
making that up
I'm
or not. It's
saying
kind of hard to tell
for
when
free
people talk about
individual adults, there should be no legal parameters on their behavior as long as it does not hurt anyone else or endanger the national security of the country. But in a communist system,
See, he was saying actually the correct thing, which he doesn't believe, by the way, until he mentioned national security. People should have the right to do whatever they want, so long as it does not harm anybody or infringe on anybody else's ability to do the same, to do what they want. And that's like a very basic philosophical principle for both positive and negative liberty, actually. You can use that as a basis for a lot of policymaking and stuff. But then when he mentioned national security, that's fake libertarian alert, basically. Because he cares about the state more than the individual.
There is none of that. None of
what
it.
do you mean by hurt? Define hurt in a legal sense.
Well, you cannot steal.
In
you
a legal sense? Dude, we're
cannot,
talking about
You
philosophy.
cannot rape. You cannot defame, tell lies about somebody to damage their reputation. You cannot sell the country's security secrets to a foreign power. These are all, well-established things that most societies understand.
Well, let's go back to the hot button issue of today, which is child drag shows. Is that hurting someone?
It's hurting children. You have no...
How we legally
so they're
define
talking more about stuff that isn't happening.
I obviously have my opinions on it.
A child drag show, child pageantry is fucked up. The right wing does this more than the left ever has. But, if a kid wants to dress up, they should be allowed to dress up. And I think that, that would include drag, I guess, because drag isn't necessarily sexual, but it is a caricature of femininity, and it can be useful if a kid wants to dress up, and that could be an opportunity for their parents or whoever to explain to them, sometimes you'll see grown-ups doing this, and this means that they're sort of pretending to be a woman. They're wearing the makeup and the clothes and the whatever. Or something like that. It's picture this argument being applied to Halloween costumes. You would never.
Curious, what about a child, putting on this makeup, acting in adult manners, and pulling their clothes off? Would you define as the line legally?
Dog, that's not a drag
the law
show.
should intervene and say you cannot engage in this behavior.
Well, if you put on a show that is exposing male genitalia, that is...
But they're not all doing that, right?
No.
The issue for me, I'll break it down, is you've got 10-year-olds on stage at adult bars where it's 21 to enter, but they have special laws that allow children to perform and then leave. And they have little boys ripping their clothes off, revealing still more clothes, but it is the act of stripping down to shorts or t-shirts as men throw money at them. This is a sexualized performance. I personally believe...
I feel like this is a cringe, really dumb thing that Tim Pool, saw one time, and now he's making it into... He's making a mountain out of a molehill now to make this seem like it's this national phenomenon in service of his own culture war narrative or whatever. But, I'll just refer back to the refrain of child pageantry being bad, but if kids want to dress up, then that's fine, and this probably didn't happen, but if it did in the one case, that's not good, and it's not happening as a broad trend of things. Oh, dang.
Yeah, I'm not a staunch libertarian or anarchist or anything like that. I believe that many of our laws
Damn,
are
that's
rooted
crazy.
in
He's a
strong
authoritarian.
moral systems, which is why there are certain limits to when parents have rights and when the state has rights. So, does the state have a right to force a medical treatment on a child in defiance of the parents?
Yes.
Tough question, right? Depends on the medical treatment. If we said a kid was dying
I'm joking.
because
My
their parents were
actual
trying to enforce veganism on
prescription
them, and
is my actual prescription for that is no. States do not have rights. In the moral philosophical sense, states are not a moral actor when we're considering rights, right? The parents, if we're talking about a medical procedure that a child, somebody who's underage, is going to undergo that they want to, and their parents are against it. For example, let's use a top surgery. Let's say it's something like that, and their parents are against it. If they are of the medical age of consent, then that's all well above board. There's no issues there. If say the kid is 16, if there's a socially agreed upon standard that they're old enough to make certain medical decisions about themselves, then their parents are not up for consideration in this process. The only two people that matter are the kid and the doctor, right? The state, under no circumstance, even if the kid's too young to consent to surgery on their own, let's say they're 12 or 13, then their parents are a consideration in that scenario, because they're the legal guardian that you go to if the kid can't consent to like certain medicinal matters. But at no point in either of those scenarios, hypothetically, would you ask the state? Would the state be involved in, like, are you allowed to provide somebody with this medical procedure or this medicine or whatever, you know? That's between the doctor and the kid, and, like, if things get really hairy, the ethics board of other doctors, right? Don't.
Protein deficient and malnourished, we would definitely want some authority to come in and be like, you got to give the kid meat, you got to give him food. But what if the parents are trying to, the parents are refusing, say, like a gender transition, and then the state decides for the betterment of the child, we are going to intervene. We, at least we here at Timcast, I'd say absolutely not. The state should not enforce and mandate that on parents. So
there's one problem with what he's saying, and that's that this doesn't exist, what he's talking about. The state does not mandate this. What happens is, in this process, in order for it to even get to the point where somebody who is underage is, like, considering gender transition surgery of any kind, they would have had to have extensive meetings with a therapist beforehand, and they would have, like, had to have like informed the surgeon or the doctor that they're going to, with a recommendation from the therapist, that this is one of the things they could do. And at no point will the state intervene to make the surgery happen. Like, if there's an abusive situation at home, then the state might and should intervene on behalf of the kid to maybe, like, ensure they have a safe environment away from their parents. But ultimately, like, that decision is up to the kid. No state actors need apply, right? And this isn't a thing that happens currently. Not in America, at least. You know, you might be able to say, like, well, in this country, but I'm not in that country right now. Oh, nice start.
The parents are refusing, say, like a gender transition, and then the state decides for the betterment of the child, we are going to intervene. We, at least we here at Timcast, I'd say absolutely not. The state should not enforce and mandate that on parents. So there really is a cultural and more individually communal-based morality around when we want the state to intervene.
And this is the beauty of the federal system, because you have different cultures in different areas. And certain areas, they have ordinances against strip clubs. Some places it's fine. That is best left to the local level, that kind of thing. But the principle that underage children should be exposed to that kind of stuff, I have no problem with the state stopping that at all.
So I actually think you're onto something when you're talking about culture.
This is why clubs have bouncers, by the way.
Culture and this issue of culture.
What they're talking about, the world that these guys have made up in their head is a world where bouncers don't exist, and none of the social conventions that we're talking about exist, because in their mind those social considerations don't exist because they are pedophiles. But that's not the world we live in, and there are not just rules but social conventions that need not be written formally into rules for fear of, I guess, misinterpretation down the line that would prevent kids from going into inappropriate environments where they could be subject to that kind of exploitation.
Because let's ask ourselves a simple question. In China and in even Iran, a non-communist state, there are no necessary laws against these things. Why? Because it is already organically within their culture.
Again, Haas is attributing this to states where it absolutely does not exist, but what the argument he's making here generally is correct, is that, like, you don't need to make laws on these things because social conventions are better at dealing with them, and laws would be a very, very clumsy tool in order to attempt to reach the same solution. And in fact, it would only open it up to more misinterpretation, because it is, it's very possible to find loopholes and twist the language of laws, and then I think we know the bad things that can lead to.
And it's an unwritten rule that this is impossible. So these unwritten bonds of civilization, which don't have to be enacted into law, is actually the more fundamental premise of communism. What does communism mean in China for a Chinese person? In America, it means the totalitarianism for the average person when they hear that word. But in China or in Russia, communism doesn't mean the totalitarianism of the state. Communism means the already recognized communal existence of the Chinese nation or the Russian nation given, elevated to the supreme interest. This is why it's inherently patriotic in
Supreme.
China or even in Russia, like the communist.
More Nas bullshit from Haas, but I mean, leave it to a tanky to take a good point and, you know, squander it like he's doing here, but yeah. I don't know if I really need to belabor this point, but this is not really how things work. I mean, what he's describing is just a fundamental part of the social contract in every country. But in China and Russia, these are absolutely not idealized or ideal examples of what he's talking about, because those countries are horrible and fascist. Obviously, America isn't an ideal example of this either. You could point to certain social problems with idolizing the concept of youth. But you know. The initial point, though, is correct about social conventions at times being much better than laws at maintaining a sort of socially permissible environment.
Communists in Russia are, you know, far more patriotic even than Putin, right? And there's a reason for that. Because communism everywhere outside of the West means giving representation and political supremacy to the existing civilizational values and communal bonds inherent in a people. This is why Marxism-Leninism is national informed. Now, in the American case,
the Volk even,
we have a problem in America because we don't know how to define ourselves as a nation. We don't have these unwritten bonds of civilization, or if we did have them in the past.
No, we do. In fact, America is one of the countries where nationalism is the strongest in the Western world, at least. It, like, legit, the only places where I think you could find stronger nationalism than in America would probably be the Balkans. And we all know what the Balkans is like.
They've substantially eroded. But to bring it back to the question of the impossible ideal of liberalism, why is that? And I think I would respond to it by saying, because in America we have seen the total hegemony of cultural liberalism, the view that any collective existence is false, is not legitimate, and that the real legitimacy is only the whim of the individual. And this is an extension of the liberal ideology to the sphere of culture. So the question of communism in America is not just a question of the economy or policy. It's also a question of acquiring and building a nation. How do we learn how to live with each other and reproduce ourselves as a civilization? This is a fundamental communist question, as much as the question of who owns the land, who owns the banks, and who owns the resources. There's also a question of how do we exist collectively or in an organic way without it having to be enforced. And I think this is the premier American question of the 21st century. America must find a way to exist as a nation, or else the United States will be united no longer.
I'm not convinced that it can find a way. And to go back to what you were talking about when you mentioned federalism and, you know, certain rules in certain states, I think that is actually a recipe for disaster. It may be good in a certain sense for a certain amount of time, but ultimately it will lead to chaos. Abortion is a big issue in the United States. It's one of the key wedge issues. And my position as of today is that it is a federal question, whether or not an unborn human being does have constitutional rights.
He's bringing it to abortion. I hate this.
If we have two states, we have Oklahoma and Colorado. They border each other. In Oklahoma, abortion is completely illegal. In Colorado, it is completely unrestricted up to the point of birth. A lot of people I talk to, more libertarian and classically liberal, will say this is a good thing. That means if you want those rules, you can go to Colorado and get those rules. And I say, what happens when, under one system of governance in the United States and one constitution, a man and a woman get pregnant? Obviously, the woman is the one pregnant carrying the baby. And let's say at 7 months, the woman decides, I can't be with this man. I don't want to have this baby. Now, the baby can survive outside the womb, but she decides to jump the border to Colorado, taking the child with her. The man then says, no, wait, don't kill it. There's no reason to kill it. I'll take the child. It's my child. And Colorado says, we don't care. We're going to kill it. You have these dramatically different.
What he's talking about is not real in a like healthy functioning relationship. If the child is a product of rape and the rapist wants to keep it, that has no bearing on the decision making there. If it's a healthy couple, that scenario would never even happen. Like emotionally healthy and like socially healthy and stuff.
Different worldviews. Where in one state they're saying she is kidnapping a child to murder it, and Colorado saying it's just a medical procedure.
It is just a medical procedure.
I don't see how in the long term, and this I'm not trying to ignite an abortion debate. I'm just pointing out one extreme example where the views are becoming so disparate that it could lead to absolute violence. And we saw this with the first Civil War. I say the first, scary, right? In the United States, where you had states
Oh, yeah.
arguing who is or is not a person. And
If anybody didn't know, Tim is a huge fan of like Civil War posting. He loves to post like the second Civil War is coming or whatever. Oh, he almost got me with that. Well, there go both of us.
guaranteed constitutional
Barnes.
rights. And so the Civil War in the United States was not completely just about the civil rights
Dude.
of Black Americans.
Me and
It was
Yoshi
a much,
HD
much
are
broader
getting
and
messed
complicated
up back here,
However,
dude.
it was obviously slavery which led to this main issue. Bleeding Kansas, pre-Civil War 7 years, was a fight over whether or not Kansas would be a slave state or a free state. And the disparate ideology of the United States were murdering each other in that state. And then the Civil War started, which brought in all the other states. And this was mainly around whether or not Abraham Lincoln was going to abolish slavery or suspend the expansion of slavery. Then when Abraham Lincoln, of course, rallies troops and conscription and makes people go quell the rebellion, it causes many other states to break apart. So you get my general point here.
I think what I would say is that one of the things Marxism I think is useful for is identifying that there may be a deeper cause. And this is not economic reductionism, but it's an analysis of his social differences. So we know in the Civil War, underlying this difference of opinion were different classes, the slavocrat classes of the South, for whom slavery was the primary mode of accumulation, versus the kind of northern industrialists who believed that, no, we shouldn't have a stagnant system of accumulation. We should have industrial innovation and so on, which was directly opposed to slavery, which was stagnating the productive forces. So underlying the clash of the ideology was a class difference, and I think it's the same today. I think today the difference you're seeing in America is a clash between hegemonic institutions, which act as social engineers, elevated above all of society on the basis of modern science and on the basis of expert knowledge, versus the communal, or whether we agree with them or not, the authentic values.
Okay, what he's saying here, he's taking the very real Marxist view of the class conflict and the class divide, and he's turning it into the fascist vision of it. This is like one of the perversions of Marxism that actually the Nazis and Hitler engaged in the 1930s, where it is in reality it is the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, the working class and the owning class. Hello, Y0. You're in one. A deep political chat while playing Mario Kart Wii. Yeah, I heard about this debate a little while ago, and I thought it was had the potential to be insane, and so I thought it'd be funny if I tried to review the debate while racing, and it has produced some, results so far. But yeah, what Haas is doing here, both these guys, by the way, are dishonest actors, I think. So neither of them are, like, genuine here. He was talking about the class divide, and in the Marxian sense, it's proletariat and bourgeoisie. But what he is saying is what the Nazis' view of the class divide is, which is intelligentsia and uneducated rural hinterlands. Basically what conservatives frequently fearmonger about with the urban elite versus the rural working man. And of course they have to preface it with urban and rural, because for them it's not actually about the meaningful class divides in society, it's about people who are smart versus people who are stupid, and they're trying to make the stupid people look like the good guys. So that's the legwork they kind of have to do. But it is a clever rhetorical device. For people who are less genuine, it is a clever rhetorical device that enables them to sort of LARP as the populist.
People possess, or at least think they possess, because I'm not going to give conservatism such an easy, scot-free free pass. That's exactly it. Because I understand also how certain capitalists also influence these kind of rural areas and completely drive opinion and all the brainwashing that goes on. But nonetheless, they have a more authentic interaction with these kind of beliefs. It's more close to their heart than, say, a kind of liberal who just believes this because an expert told them to believe it, and they don't relate to it authentically necessarily. So what I will say is that, look, America, amidst all of our multiculturalism, amidst all of these cultural differences, there is something that we can identify, at least in a preliminary fashion, that is common to us as American civilization, and it's pragmatism. We believe the ultimate truth as Americans is what works, what is sustainable, what can fend for itself, like Jack London's The Call of the Wild, a beautiful piece of American literature expressing our culture. And I think it's true also for culture. We can have these debates about what should be moral, what should be legal, what should we put on the books all we want. But at the end of the day, what matters is what's going to work. What's going to be compatible with a genuine collective human existence. And when I say that, I mean the ability for human beings literally to reproduce an existence, not only biologically, that's also very...
This is like nothing speak. I think he's just sort of saying platitudes that don't really mean much. I'll let him keep going though.
People need to be able to feel like, you know, they want to have kids and raise families and have family values. But also something that's not going to drive people to want to kill themselves and have a moral crisis where they get into drugs and fentanyl. And this is the spiritual element that is actually, if you want to put it in a vulgar way,
okay, this
necessary
is the,
for human beings to work, just to exist.
Mysticism
we need to
in,
feel like we live in a society commensurate with morality, with beauty, with goodness, just to be able to function. So it's very American that we place an emphasis on just function.
There is a diamond in the rough here. What games do you like to play? Well, I've played a lot of games on stream. Mario Kart, Minecraft, Super Smash Bros, Pokemon. But I think lately I've decided to mostly stick to Mario Kart, I think, because I think for the sake of growing the channel, it's better if I stick to one game. And, you know, I've had my fun playing other games, but it's, you know, I want to take this a little bit more seriously as a thing that I will eventually start doing full-time. So... yeah, that's an idea of what I do. But fun game. Yeah, it is. Especially if you know how to like not take it super seriously. What Haas said there was a lot of like I should play more of it. Hey, I mean, you know, you should play what you want to play, I think. Tetrio gets in the way. Ah, Tetris enjoyer, I see. I'm more of a Puyo Puyo Tetris kind of guy. Tetrio is actually too fast for me. Yeah. With what Haas was saying there is a diamond in the rough. Most of what he was saying was the sort of myth of like fascism with the like one land, one people shit. Or at least that's a lot of rhetoric that fascists frequently use. But it is definitely true that when there is a visible kind of decay in a certain country, like with the United States, I would attribute this mostly to infrastructure and the state of like Protestant churches mostly that exist as conservative pundits and means of making money. That is not healthy for the social character of a society, and so there need to be proper measures taken to address those things. Infrastructure is pretty straightforward, infrastructure funding and whatever. Religion in the United States, that would also be sort of straightforward, not quite as straightforward, but you could very easily sort of clamp down on churches as these tax exempt entities. You know, that's the sort of diamond in the rough there, is that when you have a genuine and visible spiritual rot in society that sort of muddies the waters of what people use for the foundations of their moral beliefs, such as the case with religion in America, then that's bad. But that's not really what Haas is talking about. So
and it works.
Get back to it.
But I think this may be a key to, for me at least.
And by the way, while I usually stream for 2 hours, I'm going to go until this video reaches an hour 15 minutes. So I could have gotten through about half of it today, and then I will come back to it on Wednesday.
Speaking, I'm the only communist here, but for me, this is key to American communism. Understanding the pragmatism as a kind of basis.
You know, so really what it comes down to in all of these arguments is a cohesive culture where people agree with each other.
No, well, no.
And of course, Tim trying to bring it back to the cultural cohesion, multiculturalism, bad talking points, which is which is something that you frequently hear European Nazis say. And by European Nazis, I mean mostly I think the Sweden Democrats is where I first heard these talking points. But I'm sure if you listen to the
no, look. We had a
AFD,
system
you get that as well.
Works when it's used, and that's the American Constitution, division of powers. And you're right that federalism creates problems, and you have cases in Texas. A mother will take her transitioning boy to California because she can't transition him and you can't transition him in Texas. But if you have a
Top 10
centralized
things that
unitary
definitely
state,
happen in the real world and
whichever
aren't made up in
faction
this guy's
gets into
brain.
power can enforce their dictates on
Right.
the whole country.
Well, of course, unless
And-
everyone had the same moral beliefs.
and we don't all have the same moral compass. You know, there is a unifying culture in America that's getting increasingly
23,000
shattered
TR
right now because you have a
Well,
big
that's enough to
polarization
you.
going on. And I'd say that is driven almost exclusively by
Come
the
on,
left.
dude.
You know, this is, you talked before about, you know, the communists in America. Well, look, parties like the Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, they have had a major impact in infiltrating the universities, infiltrating the Democratic Party, driving their policies, whether it's socialized healthcare, whether it's transgenderism, whether it's wokeism,
guy's
gutting
talking
the military,
nonsense.
you know, making America no longer energy independent. You know, you got a Marxist right now who's Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, and she is cutting every energy lease she possibly can in this country. You've got a Secretary of Energy, another Marxist, Jennifer Granholm, who wants to make all U.S. military vehicles electric by 2030.
Okay,
You've got another
I'm-
Marxist, June.
I'm willing to bet all the people he's bringing up that are Marxist right now, because he mentioned cultural Marxism earlier by name. I'm willing to bet all these people are just Jewish, and for him the term Marxist and Jewish are interchangeable, and he doesn't want it to be too obvious. At least not yet. So,
Julie Su, who's Secretary of Labor, who is helping these Chinese-driven strike wave that we have seen in the United Auto Workers
Chinese-driven,
Union.
of course he has to
in
say.
the,
Dude, okay, both of these people... Alright, this is actually insane. People who are anti-China, who aren't on the left, and people who are pro-China that are on the left, both agree that China is communist, which is the fucking wildest thing to me. So this guy, what he's saying is that, like, the hot labor summer, as it were, that we had in the United States, extremely based, by the way, was China-driven, or whatever, basically arguing, oh, the government of China did the massive wave of labor strikes in the United States. What times do you usually stream? I stream at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And like I said, usually I go for 2 hours, but this time's a little bit different. China hates independent labor unions. I have to convert it? Okay. For Europe, most countries in Europe, I imagine that would be like 6:30 p.m. or something like that. Either 6:30 or 7:30, depending on the time zone. But like this guy has no idea what he's talking about here, because China, if this were in China, China would have prevented these strikes from happening in their country. China hates independent labor unions because they don't align with the Chinese Communist Party. Not very communist of them, I must say, to not like organized labor. I think this guy's just huffing copium because he doesn't want to believe that workers in America are genuinely capable of like organizing on their own. Because he's like one of the ideas guys. He's like an Ayn Rand fanatic or whatever, who believes that all history is determined by the Ubermensch or whatever. 6:30 p.m. for you? Okay.
Almost put UPS out on strike. These are driven by the Chinese, just like Black Lives Matter.
By the Chinese. I wonder what the fuck this guy's
They
convictions
want a
could be.
revolution here.
Right, but that
I
seems
would
more
want
like our
to
nation's
see.
being attacked with disruptive, chaotic ideas instead of someone's trying to build something, right?
Well,
Like,
yeah,
if-
look, and this is a key point that Haas is talking about. You got this, you know, they talk about the unifying communism in China, or say, and I still think Russia is, as you say, Haas, has still got communist forms there. When the communists are in control,
That's
they
funny
want
as
to
fuck. They
unify
both
the
think
country.
Russia's communist
they want
too.
family values. They want to unify their patriotic, but they spread the disruptive side of communism here. Just like China will execute drug dealers, but they
Dude, it's so fun. Okay, these guys are both like... This is grifter to grifter communication, because they're saying China is communist, so when they do things here, that's bad. But when we look at their country and they're being communist, that's good, actually. They just like authoritarianism. The only commonalities between former Soviet Russia and modern Russia is the authoritarianism. The good things that the Soviet Union did, which there were a few, they're gone now. And, you know, Putin no longer does those things. And meanwhile, China was like, I mean, they've been a very weird case, but they're very capitalist now. These guys just like authoritarianism, and this is why they'll praise China when it's doing things in China, but they'll like condemn them when there's anything that could be remotely maybe attributed to them sort of in America, or when they want to make up something that they're doing, which is stupid, because if you want to condemn China and Russia as states for doing bad things or whatever, you want to say like, yeah, that's a bad thing they're doing, you don't have to look very hard. You don't have to make stuff up either. But these guys do have to, because they like the bad things that these countries do.
Kill Americans with fentanyl every day, because their goal is to destroy America and keep their country together. Russia will clamp down on gays and transgenders, but their communist friends spread it.
See, this guy is anti-queer. They were just talking about trans people earlier. When it comes to America, he's anti-trans because, oh, they're grooming the children and whatever. But when they're talking about Russia and China, all of a sudden he's pro-trans and pro-queer, or at least ostensibly he is, because, oh, oppressing them is bad, and that's what these countries are doing. No consistent values on display here.
Here, because the goal is to destroy us, to take us over, while preserving themselves. This is the whole crux of the argument. Communism is patriotic when it's in control. When it's not in control, it's completely unpatriotic, because its goal is to destroy the existing social order so they can then establish their order.
So I completely disagree, just
Current
because
social
I think
order
part
is
of is practical experience on my part, what you say about
Oz
DSA and
disagrees.
CPUSA, and also my understanding of history. You say that it's the communists who have infiltrated the system, but all evidence and experience on my part shows me the opposite is true. It's the system that has infiltrated the communists. So during the 1940s, for example, there was a
He might be cooking here, I'm not sure.
50,000 member strong CPUSA. Maximally, according to some historians, 300 of which were Soviet agents of some kind. Now keep in mind, after the invasion of Hungary in 56, where there was widespread disillusion with the Soviets
You
ceased
have a lot of
to...
VR? Yeah, that's because I've had the game since 2010, but I also don't care about my VR anymore. I struggle to maintain my 7K. Don't worry about the 7K. There's always going to be more Mario Kart Wii out there.
Who have ideologically motivated agents. They would just bribe people, basically, with money, right? But at this point, fast forwarded decades later, of an 8,500 strong CPUSA, 1,500 of them are FBI informants. So the CPUSA itself has been infiltrated. The institutions, the academic institutions.
GG's, I played you
remember,
earlier, might join
don't mean
back
to be
trying
too
to
much of a
find a lobby. GG's, Yoshi on YouTube. It's on my screen, it's hard not to care about it. Yeah, that's true. I just kind of, I guess a good technique would just be to, like, find other things to look at and stuff like that. Oh, no. For me, this debate. If there was something to hide it, it would be a lot easier. That's true. That would be actually a really nice option. So, in this section, I don't know what Haas is going to argue, but I do think if he wanted to make, like, the point I would make about the system infiltrating the communists is that when socialist and communist parties concern themselves too much with electoralism, they tend to become more moderate and become, like, liberals and stuff like that. At least with socialist parties in Europe a lot, this has definitely been the case, where they have been kind of, in some countries, kind of reduced to social democrats, and in Britain with the Labour Party, they've been reduced to just being conservatives. In Archaea, you can hide and show your potential. Oh, that's cool. But it is true that, like, engaging with the system that currently exists, like capitalist system or whatever, it does very much have the potential to forcibly turn you into a part of that system in a way that you originally would not want to be. And that's a very difficult thing to maintain. Some groups are better or worse at staving that off than others, but it is true that like there are some communist and socialist parties in Europe that are not really socialist or communist anymore, and some, you know, that don't even advocate for collective ownership. But like I said earlier, I don't know if that's what Haas is actually going to say about this. BTRM
But I
mode
also
could
think it's common
hide
sense.
my VR.
What makes more sense? Just an ideology being the octopus that is driving all of
replace
this,
it
or
with,
money? Who funds these institutions? Who
Race
funded the
finishing times
destructive
instead?
cultural
Oh, that would
left,
be cool.
as you describe it? It was the CIA through Rockefeller Ford Foundation money, the Institute for Social Research, the Frankfurt School, that was funded by the CIA.
Okay, whoa, there's a lot to talk about that Haas just said there. Mario Kart Wii is an interesting game to be playing while talking about communism. It's cool, just an interesting match, if that makes sense. Yeah, and that's partially why I did it, because I was like, well, I've seen people that talk politics on YouTube. I've seen people that play Mario Kart, and I know there's not that many people that stream it. So what if I live stream Mario Kart with a pretty decent setup while talking about politics? And I think that's going to do me well in the long run. And it does show a degree of task management skill, I think. Like, change the text with the game. Yeah, I gotcha. Most people playing this game are too young to understand any of this, to be honest. Yeah, and that's I'm fully prepared for that. And you know, if you find something that like you don't understand, always feel free to ask questions. I've been in politics for 7 years at this point. I've been interested in politics for a long time, ever since I was in high school. And it's like only very recently have I considered myself to really get to a point where I like genuinely understand politics rather than just trying to engage with it. I'm 21 and I don't understand any of this even. That is perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Let me rewind like 5 seconds to see what Haas said here, or 10 seconds.
Who funded the destructive cultural left, as you describe it? It was the CIA through
Politics in 2010, it came with my Mario Kart Wii. Very
Rockefeller
true. This
Ford
is,
Foundation
I've
money,
always
the
said
Institute
this.
for Social Research, the Frankfurt School, that was funded by the CIA.
Okay, so now Haas is engaging in anti-Semitic talking points. Beware of people bearing the label of MAGA communist. It is as stupid as it sounds. When people say stuff like Frankfurt School or CIA funded, and whatever, it's like a veil for anti-Semitism. Less so with the CIA funded stuff, because the CIA does a lot of shit. But first of all, the CIA didn't even exist at the time that the Frankfurt School existed in the 1930s. There was no CIA. So that's that off the table. Tankies often will invoke the CIA funded shit because they just hate America, and that's like their only politics. But whenever somebody says the words Frankfurt School, that means they're basically a Nazi.
Specifically, and this is where I disagree with you, it's not that China and Russia are disrupting our culture with this stuff. We are doing it to them. We are spreading cultural color revolutions to disrupt traditional societies all across the world. We're not only doing it against the communists in China and Russia, because who funds the...
Oh yeah, color revolutions is also a thing that tankies talk about a lot. It has been the case that like the United States has staged coup, like military coups and whatever in different countries, but we just call that a military coup. Tankies often some people will often use the word color revolution because they don't like a certain revolution that happened. Like, for example, in Ukraine, there was a revolution in 2014, a mostly peaceful revolution that ousted a very corrupt president and very corrupt leadership and replaced them with more democratic leadership, which has led to Ukraine being a more or less democratic country today. But because that stepped on the toes of Russia, a lot of tankies called it a color revolution because they wanted to believe that the big bad boogeyman, the USA, was responsible for it and not the genuine, like, political will of people in Ukraine. But with stuff like this, I feel like maybe not I'm losing the plot, but I feel like
the LGBT movement
getting
in Russia.
more
It's
off
not
track here.
Communists, it's us. We do it, right? We also do it in Europe to our supposed allies, Hungary, and all of our NGOs and interest groups. We're the ones spreading wokeism globally. We're doing it through the...
It's true that the United States does have like a lot of cultural and political exports, and possibly queer acceptance is one of them, but it's not anything as direct or like full of subterfuge that Haas suggests here. The way that progressive values spread is mostly through changing cultural norms, which happens over a long period of time. The way that he's describing things spreading is more characteristic of fascism. First time playing that track, it's a good track. It's kind of confusing, though, for a first time through. And, of course, if you ask these people what wokeism means, it probably can't give you a set definition. Like, you ask 50 people, you'll get 50 definitions and stuff. It's just another right-wing, like, cultural...
The oligarchical capitalist class. And let me tell you something. As someone with some experience in this regard, I am a devoted communist who does want a communist power. It's like, as Marx says, the communists disdain to conceal their aims, right? So, as do I.
That is true. Communists are very bad at hiding their power level. I've had to learn how to do that more recently.
You cannot keep an operation going without a steady flow of income, money, and revenue. Or else the institution that the agent is planting themselves in will corrupt them. If you have a communist sitting as a post as a professor in a university...
What's a power level? Oh, the term hiding your power level means, like, not being completely forthright with your political beliefs. So I am... To fully disclose my power level, I am a, well, let's just say I'm a socialist. You could call me an anarcho-communist if you want, but usually that's not a thing that tends to fly very well in polite conversation or even in a conversation about politics, right? So I'll do a thing called hiding my power level, where instead I'll try to just talk about directly the thing we're talking about rather than larger political beliefs. So if it's like, if we're talking about the housing crisis, then I'll stick to talking about the housing crisis and the individual things that I believe with respect to housing. And I won't mention that I'm a socialist or a communist. That's what hiding your power level means. And it also implies I like temper my language a little bit, so I don't argue necessarily as passionately as I might otherwise. That's hiding your power level.
for 40 years, the institutional culture of
Dude, what? I've never had that happen
according
before.
to Marxism, will shape their outlook. This is why Maoism talks about the need for a mass line. Even when you create a party apparatus with a bureaucracy and a fundamental organization, you're paying people a salary. Mao innovated the necessity that you need to actually break out of that bubble, that institutional bubble, go down to the people, rural people, the country, and hear the opposite perspective. So just to humble yourself, right? Because institutions corrupt people. So I completely disagree that communists have infiltrated the institutions. To me, it seems more clear that the institutions,
You forgot to
funded,
9999
financed, and
before?
created
No,
by the
actually.
oligarchical capitalist class, have corrupted the communists.
Well, this is what I'd say to that. The foundations, the Ford Foundation.
Okay, what Haas said there about, like, capitalism sort of corrupting communism is true. In fact, there are a lot of, like, academic writers and scholars that refer to this process by name, like recuperation, where capitalism sort of absorbs criticisms of itself into part of itself, if that makes sense. But I don't think he needed to mention Maoism. I guess that was just like a whole part of his bit. And of course, it is telling that the two people he refers to the most in his language about communism are Mao and Stalin, two people who were some of the worst examples. Like, there's only a couple people that would be worse examples than Mao or Stalin of what communism is and how to do it.
Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, were infiltrated by the communists starting back in the 30s, even the 1920s. All of those institutions are promoting communist left-wing causes. The Biden administration is chock full of communists. That is why they're spreading this wokeism around the world. That is why they're doing this. But you know this. So we are
Again,
the FBI,
bullshit
which
wokeism
used to
talking
attack
points.
communists, is now basically working for them. You know this.
Okay, this talking point about the FBI is something that I haven't encountered too much before, but I have seen it like once. It is true the FBI used to go after communists a lot, and believe it or not, they still do. Like I'm probably, because I've been affiliated with some socialist orgs in the past, I'm probably on an FBI list somewhere, but nowadays it's not as active. And the FBI is concerned first and foremost with what it views as threats to American national security, right? Their agenda is America and not much else. So what they're doing right now, the FBI, is they're worrying about far right terrorism and stuff like that. Which is why this guy is angry that the FBI is not going after communists, because they're going after his boys, the far righters. And even though this guy says he's a classical liberal, he is on the far right, and he probably hates Jews for how much he talks about cultural Marxism and the Frankfurt School.
This attack on MAGA that they're involved in, this is because they're driven by leftists.
Well, so-
Comey talked about his communist background. Brennan talked about voting, the head of the CIA, talked about voting for Gus Hall. The communist movement, the socialist movement, has massively infiltrated almost every major American institution, and this is the cause of the wokeism. This is the cause.
By the way, it's worth mentioning that probably every time, I don't have confirmation of this, but I would be willing to bet that more than 50% of the times this guy says somebody's name specifically, that they're Jewish. And that, like, that's why he knows their name or whatever. A lot of anti-Semites will do that.
Cause of the chaotic American foreign policy, because we are being used to destroy ourselves and our allies, and that has been directed from China and still to some degree from Russia.
You're saying that wokeness is not communism.
No.
And that's why you have MAGA communism.
Well, it's not. It's just Marx. There's no wokeness in China or Russia. There's no wokeness in communist countries.
Well,
So
yeah, China's, they're doing ads where they've got young men who.
Okay, I don't think I should have to explain why this is stupid, but I will. The timer on your screen is about 20 minutes off. Yeah, I know. It's because when I start streaming, there's like a 20-minute waiting room or whatever, so I can set stuff up. As I started at about 1:30, but I'll start the stream, I'll start OBS at like 1:10 or whatever, so I have time to write posts and things like that.
Who are fit.
It's just like a basic starting soon screen.
They're ripped men with shaved heads jumping out of
So
airplanes.
to me, it's like.
But with the whole wokeism does not equal communism and stuff. I mean, if you want to substitute wokeism for a term that maybe we do understand, like social progressivism, I guess the most charitable possible interpretation would be like, yes, it is true that social progressivism on its own is not communism. But what he's saying is that, they're incompatible. What he's saying is, you can't have social progressivism and communism or whatever, which is the opposite of what's true. In fact, these things, you have to have both of these things if you have a communist world. This is where things get very heavily into ideal visions of things. But part of the stuff that Marx says about the class conflict in his writing is that it transcends ethnic and other identitarian lines. The oppressed working man in America is just as much an oppressed working man as the oppressed working man in Russia or in Saudi Arabia or in Iraq or Indonesia or wherever else, right? But you don't care about improving at the game. I guess so. Mario Kart Wii for me is less a game where I'm concerned with improving at the game, and more so one where I'm concerned about fun racing experience. The games that I care about improving at are I think Super Smash Bros. And Street Fighter. Those are the two games where I care a lot about improving my skill level. And to a degree, Minecraft, when I build creative mode stuff, I want to see, I want to learn better techniques of building. But this game, I'm not too concerned with that. I mean, it's always nice, and I'm sure I'll learn stuff, but I think I've learned pretty well how to play the game, and I'm not as good at theorizing on what I am or am not getting better at in Mario Kart Wii as I am in other games. So, anywho, You cared about improving in the past? Yeah, I used to. In fact, it was a bit of a toxic relationship that I had with this game, where I would care about VR as a metric for how much I had improved, and it like I got super frustrated over time. No one race would be like the straw that broke the camel's back or whatever. It was just sort of an amalgam of things, and it led to me at one point in college taking a several years long hiatus from the game, at least from playing online. You know, I think I'm about as good at the game now as I will ever be. And I think the biggest component of me being good at the game right now is being able to handle a loss and being able to compartmentalize the game as ultimately just a game, a meaningless venture for fun, where even when it's a competition, it's not a competition, if that makes sense. Anyways, back to more Jewish question bullshit.
MAGA communism is not just a response to wokeness. MAGA communism, the meme, if you want to know the meaning of it, is basically this.
The memes, Jack.
The fertile soil of a communist movement in the U.S.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Okay.
Will have as its foundation the same people who are MAGA right now. It will be that because to me, MAGA is trying to give America a collective existence. It's trying to give identity to an American nation. I don't mean, oh, it's just white.
I don't think America needs any more identity. I think we've got all the identity we need. Thank you very much. You ask somebody what an American looks like, they will have a perfectly well-developed image in mind. No, but seriously, what Haas is saying here is not true. But it's also like, it's a hard thing to prove or disprove. This is mostly like ur-fascist talking points. I played Metal Gear Rising. I understand politics. Probably better than most people, because politics is basically as it appears in Metal Gear. In fact, the Metal Gear series was written by a Japanese communist, or at the very least leftist. I don't know whether he identifies specifically as one or the other. But what Haas is saying about, like, the foundations of MAGA in the United States will also be the foundations of communism. It's important to remember that a lot of the MAGA crowd are wealthier, like, small business owners and stuff like that. You know, think of the people that attended the January 6th riots, the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. A lot of them were the so-called 3%ers, people in the top 3% of income earners, you know? And who were not struggling for the means of living, some of whom owned their own businesses and things like that. That's the kind of thing that Haas is, I'm sure, referring to here in a bid to appeal to right-wingers. But it is important to note that MAGA is one of the first populist movements in the United States in a long time, along with the Bernie Sanders social revolution kind of movement. And it is true that I think populism will be the basis of socialism and communism in the future. But it's going to... it's not going to be in form of MAGA communism, because a populist horde by itself can be very easily led in a myriad of directions. It would take somebody with a talent for articulation and political theorizing and whatever to direct people's attention to somewhere. I'm 6-7K. I want to improve and enjoy the game more. My goal is 8K. That might increase whenever I will reach that. But at the same time, if I focus on my VR too much, could affect my mood. Feels like a paradox. Yeah, and look, I think the best way to do that is to recenter your concept of improving at the game around something that isn't VR, right? You should, instead of that, this is what I've taken to a little bit recently, is I've sort of like, I've redirected my attention to how am I driving? You know, am I driving well? Am I not driving well? Whatever. And if I'm driving well, I try my best to be satisfied with that, even if I didn't win the race as a result of it. Because items present a significant RNG factor. I don't think it's an especially reasonable expectation that everybody be able to engage with the item system with the optimal skill level all the time. So this race, objectively speaking, from that perspective, was not a very good race. And I guess I'm a little bit idly frustrated or unsettled by the fact that I got 10th and lost 165 VR. But really, what I'm like dissatisfied with is I don't think I drove very well because I was driving and talking at the same time, and all that. So I think driving ability is a much better way to gauge whether you're getting better. VR never mattered, lol. It's always easier to say that VR doesn't matter when you have more VR. That is something I will say for sure. In the 7000s territory, it's very hard to internalize VR doesn't matter. But if you can distract yourself from that long enough to say, okay, how I'm driving is what really matters, then that's good.
I mean,
and that'll help
it is
you get
outside
better
of the institution.
But I want to finish. Just there's 4 more minutes of this video, so I can be done with stream for today, and I will be going over the rest of it next time.
To an extent.
But let's pause. So, do you oppose what we would describe as like the woke left?
Yes.
The Palestinian LGBT
The
flag? What do you think of
woke left?
Look,
That's
here's the thing, right? I don't hate LGBT people. I think there has been a great deal of confusion,
based
a
Haas
breakdown
question?
of the family, a rise of enmity. People are channeling their feelings in destructive ways. So I want what's best for these LGBT people. I want them to be able to find
Always
peace
glad to
with what
be
they're struggling with. But whether it's the right wing or the current woke leftists showing solidarity with Palestine, I choose to believe there is an authentic reason for why they're doing it. Yes, of course, leftists are interpreting it in terms of the post-colonial studies and whatever whitey bad stuff, and right-wingers are interpreting it in their own problematic ways.
But my question,
yeah.
sorry, just to get the modern left that we see in this
I
country.
don't like LGBT flag. I don't like any LGBT flag.
Okay.
I'm just saying, like,
Well, that answers the question, I guess. I don't hate queer people, but and he proceeds to like say, well, I don't like every one of these things associated with the queer movement. So I'm pretty clear there, I guess. I've actually, the new queer flag has grown on me, particularly because of the inclusion of the trans colors. And in fact, now it's gotten to the point where sometimes the old queer flag presents a potential red flag, at least in my mind, where there are, at least there were at various points, there were a lot of TERFs and transphobes who were gay or bi or whatever, who would incorporate the regular rainbow flag in their bio to sort of signal, hey, I'm socially progressive and I oppose the trans movement, to try to excise trans people from the queer movement at large, which is pretty despicable. So I began to get a little wary of that.
the woke left is not what you would view as communist. When
Absolutely not.
Their ideals are mostly based on weird identity-based.
So this is coming back to what Haas is here, and like these guys' positions. Tim Pool's just your average right winger. Haas is what we call a Nazbol. That stands for National Bolshevik. And if you were thinking that sounds like Nazi, you'd be right, because it does. And that's actually where the Nazis got their name. National Socialists. Same, similar concept to National Bolshevik. Basically, the advocates of National Bolshevism will on some level say that National Bolshevism is a refutation of the social values of progressivism while maintaining the whole seize the means of production stuff. But really, when you push them further and further, they're really just fascists. And they don't believe much in that collective ownership either. Earlier in this video, Haas said that he would want the state to own all the means of production, which would not be communism if we're looking at philosophical definitions here. And, regardless of what you think of what it is, it's something that I don't agree with as somebody who is a leftist. I'm surprised that this track is still in CGP. Yeah, it's pretty, I think it survived pretty well. I like that iteration of the track a lot more than the previous iterations. This feels like watching a Conlang critic video when you don't know anything about linguistics. I'm sorry that it's like that. Look, next time, I'd be comfortable actually splitting this into even more than two parts, but
things.
If you want to, if there's if you have a blizzard of questions, ask away. Don't feel afraid to do that, because any one thing in this is not super complicated, but
look,
many things compounding on top of each other, that gets complicated very quick.
I started my career trying to reinvigorate the CPUSA using modern media technology, and I have run up against the obstacle of the Ukraine censors. I've run up against the obstacle of censorship on all these other issues. I have never run up a more profound. I've never run into a more.
Oh yeah, unfortunately, this guy Haas has been involved with the American Communist Party. Believe it or not, there is a Communist Party in the United States, but he has since turned it into like a hub for his weird accolades and whatever, and a lot of them are just like sort of anti-Ukraine now. Like the last thing I remember was there was like a there were some Midwestern communist parties mostly like posting about like, oh, we shouldn't be in Ukraine, Russia is in the right here, Ukraine is rightful Russian territory or whatever, which is really unfortunate. And I think that like while it might not be much damage, it is genuine damage to the communist movement, or at least what was left of it in the United States, which for me is bad because I'm a dirty commie, as it were.
Profound obstacle in my career than what the CPUSA has done to me. And I wasn't problematic, I wasn't bigoted, I wasn't any of these things they now accuse me of.
Yeah.
Just because I wanted to reinvigorate that party and return a foundation. This is what communism is about. Your foundation of the communist movement. This is true. Go back to the beginning of Marx, Lenin. This is communist organizing 101.
What? I'm getting bean cornered on this track?
That's where all of
no
your
way.
Have to authentically.
I'm actually... Dude. Channelpoint.exe started to work all of a sudden? Well, that's cool, I guess. Dude, no way. I cannot believe... That is such a big design oversight. Oh my god. I don't even feel like that was my fault. That's why I got, like, flustered there. Jeez, dude. Man, that sucks. Of course, in the meantime, Haas was saying some stupid shit about, like, return with a V or whatever, because Latin letter U and V were the same thing. And that's why... I don't know. One minute, 22 seconds left.
Interface with the notion of a communism based in universities and elites and professionals and intellectuals.
Yep, there we go.
Anti-intellectualism. Against Marxism. How can it be Marxist? Marxism is about the class struggle.
Do you have a commune? Like, do you have like a community or anything that you've built or are building?
I don't.
FC,
this is more
I don't
utopian
make my friend
socialism.
code immediately available through a command. If you want my friend code, I can provide it to you once at the end of stream.
Engels and Marx. There was various in the 1800s. They called them utopian socialists, and they wanted a new harmony and so on. They wanted to build these kind of a shell of what they would consider a functioning society. Now, personally, I think America is an experimental culture by nature, and actually, I'm not against experimental forms of association at all. I just think that we should find ways to reward and be inspired by the ones that work. So, room for experimentation. See what works. But to me, communism is not about a certain lifestyle. Communism is about a way of relating to the existential predicament of your nation, to your people, and most importantly, to the working class.
Describe your...
Okay.
Like, how is communism achieved? What would this country look like?
If it's achieved.
So,
well,
what Haas described there is mostly the fascist ethos. He described this sort of mythical existence of the nation, right? You'll notice he +1 +0 -1 VR is a very funny feeling. Yeah, that's true. Haas earlier did talk about what socialism and communism actually means, which is the workers owning the means of production, which has a variety of different ways that it could be put into practice. But here he's focusing less on that and more on the supremacy of the state and the Volk, like the myth of one people, one nation, whatever. This is something that Nazis talked a lot about in Germany. So when he says stuff like that, let me go back with it.
Like, how is communism achieved? What would this country look like?
If it's achieved. Well, I can't speak too far ahead into the future because I'm conditioned by what exists now.
Well, I guess we're in the next section now, but he was talking a lot about, like, he was talking a lot about culture from a immaterial perspective, which for me is a red flag because it's not, like, something that you could really address there. You made it? Yeah, I did. And now, 8MC, I will give you my friend code if you want it. It's not in the records, is it? No, I forgot where it was. Anyways, let me go back to this window here. Leafy. I will now I will hide the browser window there, and I'll get my friend code off to our chatter here. By the way, welcome to chat. And I'll be back next time with more cutting political analysis of two insane people arguing with each other or debating, I guess. There we go. There's my friend code. In the meantime, I'm gonna see if there's somebody else online. There are some channels I usually like to raid, because I think they're cool people. And nobody right now. So in that case, I'll see you guys on. Are they Mario Kart Wii streamers? No, funnily enough, I think I'm the only like Mario Kart Wii streamer that has a good layout for this, and there's also not that many Mario Kart Wii streamers that I watch. And I don't think TWD98 needs all the extra attention, because he's doing quite well. But usually it'll be like a Super Smash Bros. Streamer, or something like that. Or TWD98. Hey, calm down. I'm subscribed. Calm down. Yeah, with that said, I will see you guys on today's Monday, so Wednesday. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I know. I was trying to play off of that. Bye-bye. It's been nice seeing new faces in chat.